Princess Louise Waddell has known bitterness, resentment, and betrayal since the early years of her life. Marrying the emperor at a young age was only the beginning of the nightmare. 5 years after the marriage, the emperor took a mistress and exiled his young wife to a distant palace. Due to the incompetent ruler, Louise was overworked and eventually died of overwork. Realizing that she had become this very princess, the main character was horrified. Waking up on the bed, in the bedchamber of Her Highness, the girl could not believe that all this was happening in reality. No less terrible was the fact that today was the very day when Louise first expressed her displeasure to the emperor. It was after this event that the ruler exiled the unwanted princess to a distant palace. However, the main character flatly refused to die such a terrible death. In her previous life, she had always been busy with work and didn't want the same fate in this one. When she came to the emperor, she saw the ruler, Yuri Klaus Owen, openly flirting with his mistress. It was Lady Lyra Blair who noticed the princess and immediately turned the emperor's attention to her. Looking irritably in the direction of his wife, Yuri did not understand what brought her to the central palace. It was immediately obvious that he did not hide his dislike for her, and the heroine noticed that everyone around her looked at her in the same way. In the original story, Louise had no power as she was too young, and the heir in the future was produced by Lyra. Deciding to change her fate, the princess reminded the emperor of his promise. It said that if Louise solved the financial problem of the empire, then Yuri would fulfill her wish. People around began whispering that such a conversation had indeed taken place about 6 months ago. The financial issue was one of the empire's long-standing problems, but the princess managed to solve this problem in a short period. Yuri was indignant and surprised at the same time that she came to pester him about his desire. However, realizing that he had no other choice, he wanted to know what exactly his wife wanted. Everyone around assumed that the heroine would use this opportunity to get rid of the emperor's mistress. But against all odds, she didn't want the honor of being empress or the wife of a useless husband, so Louise wanted a divorce. Hearing that she wanted to get a divorce as well as abdicate the throne, Yuri was shocked. Those around were greatly alarmed, considering such a request unprecedented. They understood why the princess was asking for it so suddenly, but the girl only smiled back. It wasn't a spontaneous decision, and she'd been planning it since she was in this world because it couldn't go on like this. Come to think of it, being empress means being a free laborer, so why should she work without compensation? The nobles were terrified because if Louise abdicated the throne, then there would be no one to oversee state affairs. But the girl also had a plan in this regard because she had to be able to provide for herself after the divorce. Louise's family has never appeared in history and has never responded to her letters. Therefore, not wanting to die of hunger, the heroine decided to become an official in the imperial palace. Lyra fell into a stupor from what was happening, and Yuri looked at the princess dumbfounded. Then the girl resolutely believed that instead of being an empress, she wanted to become a subject of the emperor. And if His Highness wants her to work, then he will pay her from now on. After which Yuri jumped up and began to shout furiously at her. But Louise remained calm, believing that the emperor needed to prepare because she planned to get all this. The next morning, the heroine slept well, and after waking up, she stretched contentedly. She hadn't felt so cheerful for a long time, but Louise's memories were becoming more vivid. If she relaxes her vigilance even a little, then her memories from her past life can be completely erased. Later, thinking about it, she remembered aloud that in a past life she was a cattle civil servant. The maids who combed her hair were surprised by such unexpected and unfamiliar words. Then the heroine explained that, in other words, she was a tax inspector. When the girls heard the taxes, they nodded in understanding, and Louise realized that there was probably no world where they did not exist. Every day in her past life was difficult, but the heroine also had many pleasant and joyful moments. One day, a colleague recommended her a book to read, and from that moment on, something went wrong. After reading a few chapters, she was shocked by Louise's sad story, deciding that she could no longer read. After that, she fell asleep and, opening her eyes, found herself in this very world. The maids laughed, finding this story of traveling between worlds quite amusing. The heroine told them only to find out if they knew about similar cases in this world. Suddenly, a girl burst into her chambers, shouting that they had a problem, causing the princess to fall into a stupor. Leaving the palace, the heroine froze in place with surprise, and her maids were horrified. A huge crowd of ministers shouted that a lot of work was not yet allowed, and the princess needed to return to work. Louise didn't understand. Did she really have to do so much work? Then one of the maids whispered to her that in fact, half of this work should be done by the ministers themselves. The heroine remembered that while reading the book, she kept wondering why Louise worked so hard. After all, she was responsible not only for the initial duties of the empress, but also performed the duties of the nobility. Believing that at this rate she would die again from overwork, the heroine refused all the guests. They looked at her in horror, and the princess thought that the real Louise would hardly be able to give such an order. The ministers began to shout desperately, believing that Her Majesty could not just leave them. But the girl knew that everything was the other way around, and they were the ones who abandoned her, and also shamelessly exploited her. But the crowd continued to beg her even more to help them at least this time. They threatened that if she did not do this, they would have to resort to extreme measures. After a while, the Chancellor of the Owen Empire, Raoul Filbert, personally came to an audience with the princess. He was glad to visit her palace for the first time and hoped that Her Highness would not refuse him to call off the strike. The main character realized that this was the extreme measure that the ministers took. Raoul was the highest-ranking official in charge of state affairs as well as the youngest chancellor. In addition, he was a real genius in the original story, almost did not communicate with Louise. The hero was amazed at how steadfastly the main character still held on. He was referring to all the work she had been doing so hard so far. However, Louise had a very calm character, so such an abrupt refusal shocked everyone. She tried to do everything she could to get the emperor to notice her, but it was useless. However, Raoul had not come here to talk about state affairs at all, because what was happening outside the walls was more important. The hero handed the princess a news brochure in which gossip about her flaunted on the front page. After examining the brochure, the heroine came to the conclusion that poor Louise did not even suspect how many interesting things were around her. Also, on the front page, the biggest announcement was the scandal that occurred at yesterday's emperor's banquet. It was suspected that the main reason was the infidelity of the sovereign, whose mistress was the flower of the empire, Lyra. Looking at the heroine's puzzled face, Raoul hoped that now she understood the seriousness of the situation. The girl really thought that now everything was very serious, which the hero was incredibly happy about. Staring at him and pointing at herself, Louisa thought that she was not more beautiful than Lyra. It was strange that she was the only one who thought so, because it was obvious. The heroine wanted to hear the Chancellor's opinion about which of them was more beautiful, but Raoul, in shock and incomprehension, slammed his fist on the table, thinking that this was really so important now. Looking at the brochure again, the heroine came to the conclusion that she looked like a cat, and Lyra looked like a rabbit. In her opinion, cats were more attractive than rabbits, which unconditionally confirmed her external superiority. Seeing that the Chancellor had not given her an answer, Louisa thought that perhaps he was not interested in women. After a while, new news appeared that the Empress insulted the appearance of Lady Lyra and called herself a true beauty. Reading this, lying on the couch and chewing cookies, the heroine realized that there were spies in the palace. They were all sure that she would not be able to get a divorce, which made the heroine uncomfortable. The problem was that it was really not easy, which she had originally assumed. It was necessary to think over a clear plan and first remember everything that would happen in the future. First of all, she needed to get a divorce during this month, as the prophecy would soon come true. Yuri married Louise because of her family, whose hidden wealth was rumored to exceed that of the imperial family, and all thanks to one mine, which annually extracted elemental crystals imbued with the power of the elements. Only the Vidal family could awaken them, so the imperial family couldn't just capture them. But one day in the Vidal family, in which boys were born for a long time, a girl was suddenly born, Louise. Upon hearing this news, the previous emperor immediately demanded a marriage between their families. Their goal was to give birth to an heir with Louise's blood, who could also awaken the crystals. However, Yuri was blinded by his love for Lyra and wanted to get rid of Louise, but at that moment, a prophecy sounded in the temple. It said that the daughter of the Red Iris would bring peace and prosperity to the empire, and the one who possessed her would become the lord of the continent. The Red Iris was the symbol of the House of Wadel, therefore, the daughter of the Red Iris was the heroine herself. And every nation, not just Owen's empire, aspired to become the ruler of the entire continent. Hearing this prophecy, Yuri's mother, the queen, feared that Owen might lose Louise and ordered the guards to keep an eye on her. Because of this, the main character was shocked that she was reborn into such a complex character. In her plan of action, she wrote getting a divorce, preventing prophecy, and material enrichment. The girl understood that even if she divorced, the prophecy would still come true and she would become the key to conquering the entire continent. The imperial family would not miss such a chance, but the worst thing was that other countries might intervene as well. The best option was to return to the Vidal family, but to do so, they had to decide what to do with the other families in the family. Suddenly, a maid burst into her room, giving the heroine the emperor's order for an audience. Louise immediately cheered up because at last this long-awaited day had come. As she walked down the corridor, she thought that the emperor hadn't called her for too long and must be up to something. However, it didn't matter, and the most important thing was that today she would finally get an answer. Near the entrance to Yuri's office stood Lyra, who, seeing Louise, did not understand what had brought Her Majesty here. The heroine stared at her, thinking that she was really allowed to enter the emperor's office. Lyra apologized to the heroine, as the emperor was busy now, and asked not to disturb him. Looking at her coldly, Louise decided that her mistress thought she was going to get in the way. Frightened, Lyra immediately pretended that this was not what she meant at all. Louise's maid decided to intervene, for the empress was there at the invitation of His Highness. Everyone believed that the emperor's mistress was a good person, but the heroine considered her a wolf in sheep's clothing. In any case, Louise didn't have time for all these games, and she wanted the girl to step aside. Lyra was horrified, pretending that she had always wanted to be friends with her, and the mistress turned out to be so evil. Then the heroine wondered if she had ever mocked the girl or asked her to stay away from the emperor. Communication with a man who does not know how to listen at all tired the empress very much. Deciding to return to her room, Louise ordered Lyra to tell Yuri that from now on, if he had anything to say, let him write to her. At that moment, the door abruptly opened and the emperor came out to them, who did not understand why such a fuss came from. Lyra immediately threw herself into his arms, all in tears and looking at Louise with resentment. The main character curtsied to His Highness, deciding that it was time for her to leave. Taking her hand abruptly, Yuri did not understand whether she had been told that he wanted to talk to her, which made Lyra fall into a stupor. So Louise came here, but she was immediately informed that Yuri was busy, which greatly surprised the emperor. He immediately beckoned the heroine to his office and decided that his mistress could wait for him at her place for the time being. Entering the study and sitting opposite each other, the emperor wondered if the girl was feeling better. He was sure that she had put on this whole show just for his attention and did not understand how much longer Louise intended to continue. Making a sad look, Yuri understood that it was a mistake to bring a mistress without warning his wife, and he should have consulted. The reason for its appearance was that Lyra's family was on the verge of ruin, and many members had dispersed to other possessions. The girl herself and her younger brother were forced to wander between relatives, so the hero brought her here out of pity. Stopping his monologue with a gesture, Louise was not at all interested in listening to it, nor did she care about his thoughts on this matter. The emperor was surprised to think that the heroine understood his feelings. He hopes that the empress will let go of all her grievances and return to her duties as soon as possible. Looking at him in bewilderment, the heroine wanted His Highness to stop talking this nonsense and simply divorce her. Realizing that she was serious, the emperor's face sharply darkened. Louise wondered if he really thought she had been joking all along. Then Yuri fearfully decided to find out what would happen if he did not allow it. In that case, he would simply leave the empress no other choice, even though she wanted to do her best. Becoming even more confused, the emperor silently looked at her, expecting to hear the worst case. As it turned out, if he does not give a divorce, then Louise will also get a lover. Moreover, the emperor himself was not at all to her taste, which made the monarch completely taken aback. Having found out all this at the next meeting, Ruel was shocked, thinking the empress was crazy. He hoped that she would have the wisdom to come up with another option, but this was the only way out for the girl. The Chancellor understood that such actions would undoubtedly affect the reputation of the heroine. However, Louise, on the contrary, enthusiastically understood that the turbulent, personal life of the Empress would become quite a relevant topic for gossip. Ruel realized that she wanted to see if Yuri would divorce her if it somehow affected the reputation of the imperial family. Even if the emperor refuses to divorce, the only option for her is to be exiled in disgrace. Horrified by these words, the hero was also not delighted that the heroine continued to read news brochures. Taking it from the table, he saw an advertisement on the front page that Louise was looking for a lover, tired of the emperor's indifference. Screaming in shock and indignation, he demanded that the article be republished immediately, making corrections. However, according to Louise, it was too late, because for sure the article had already spread throughout the continent. What's done is done, and while Ruel was in a trance from what he had experienced, Louise was happy to eat the cake. The hero was sure that if the first prince was here, the empire would never be in such a state. The girl remembered that she had once seen a portrait of the first prince in one of the corridors of the palace. His name was Regan Klaus Owen, and everyone believed that he was missing. He was the legitimate son and heir of the empire, but due to an accident, power ended up in the hands of his younger brother, Yuri. The heroine remembered that he was mentioned only once in the book, without any influence on the plot. She found out that the previous emperor had health problems, because of which he went to another country for treatment. Regan decided to visit his father and went there, but his crew fell off a cliff and all the escorts were killed. It is also said that they were attacked, but the body of the first prince could never be found, so many believed that he survived. Hearing that he would one day return and restore order to the empire, Louise thought that he must have been an outstanding man. However, Ruel shook his head intensely, considering Regan even more stubborn than the current emperor. The hero knew that the first prince was nicknamed Lightning, and he had never met a more narcissistic person. Despite this, Regan enjoyed universal respect and the people pinned great hopes on him. The Chancellor also believed that one day the prince would return and put an end to all the imperial chaos. The heroine was very surprised that she was also part of this chaos. But Ruel was shocked by her last actions and did not know what to do with all this now. However, the girl believed that he should not interfere because she was quite serious. Who knows, maybe this will be her chance to find her destiny in this world. Meanwhile, in the neighboring empire of Zenoa, a thunderstorm was raging over one of the northern settlements. In one of the taverns, people were enjoying a feast while discussing the incredible amount of thunderstorm in the sky. Suddenly, the door opened, and a lonely traveler walked inside, wanting to spend the night there. The young man was surprised that it was not so dark yet, but there were already a lot of people in the tavern. The hostess believed that the recent events in the Owen Empire, where the imperial family was rumored to be in turmoil, were to blame. Giving him a pamphlet, she pointed to the Empress's announcement of a lover. Snorting from what he saw, Regan laughed sincerely, surprising the woman with his reaction. Looking at the photo of Louise, he realized that this child was cooking something interesting for them. Pretending that he urgently had important things to do, the hero began to hastily get ready for the road. Taking a news brochure with him, he poured 10 gold coins to the hostess for it, which shocked her. The newspaper cost only 5 silver pieces, and the woman tried to return them, but Regan had already disappeared. As he mounted his horse, he thought that at last the time had come for him to return. After a while, the number of citizens who supported the Empress grew rapidly. Many literary critics regarded her actions as a satirical expression of the pain of unrequited love. Louise only laughed when she read about it because she was much more serious than they thought. Her maids sitting next to her were delighted that their mistress was supported by so many people. The people criticized the emperor, demanding the release of the heroine, and this meant that she would be able to get a divorce within a month. The only thing was that the maids did not understand why she would go to work after she got divorced. After all, she was part of the Vadel family, although Louise herself had no idea where her family members were. In the meantime, another maid came and reported that a lord had arrived at the Empress's house. Louise did not understand who he was and was shocked to learn from the maids that he was the eldest son of the Vadel family. He was the first and only brother of the heroine, as well as the heir to the family. The Vadel family leaves the estate only when it comes to something important, and they came to the capital only once when Louise died. The main character thought that perhaps the story would somehow change again, as in the case of Ruel. Then she wanted to know what kind of person her brother was, which caused all the maids to be confused. The heroine pretended that she had not seen him for a long time and forgot, and then the girls began to cry, realizing that she had not seen her relatives for years. Upon learning that her brother was out of his mind, the Empress fell into a stupor. As it turned out, the most famous case occurred at the coronation of the Emperor. On that day, the heroine returned to her chambers early because of the people who pushed her away, showing disrespect. Then there was an argument between Lord Louis and Lord Emio, which escalated into a conflict. The Empress's brother was furious and burned half of his opponent's hair. Lord Emio rushed at him, furiously demanding reparations, but Louis only laughed in response. After that, he used his magic again and completely burned all the hair on Emio's head. Thus, at the age of 18, Lord Emio was completely bald and no healer could help him. In addition, Chancellor Ruel officially considered Louis insane, which shocked Louise even more. The heroine hoped that she would be able to talk to him normally, but now it seemed that she needed to start making a new plan. The maids knew that due to their temperament, the members of the Vidal family only chose the fire elements. Then the Empress wondered if she too could learn to control fire. The girls were sure that this was quite possible because the heroine also belonged to the Vidal family. Louise had already had time to familiarize herself with the literature on elementals from this world. There are different types of elemental crystals, and they are chosen by the user. The Vidal family has chosen the fire elemental for generations. Since people favored by elementals are rare, the Vidals have always had a special attitude in any country. And if Louise manages to master fire, then she will no longer have to humiliate herself in front of the Vidals in order to get asylum. Meanwhile, one of the maids reported that Lord Louis was already waiting for her outside. Meanwhile, the other servants apologized to the Lord, believing that the Empress just wanted to look good in front of a family member. Louis was furious at these words, not understanding what kind of family he was talking about. He did not consider this girl his sister at all, and he had not come here for nice conversations. At that moment, the head maid arrived in time and escorted the guest to the Empress, to the gazebo. When they arrived, the girl introduced her dear guest to Her Highness, after which she hurried away. The hero was infuriated by the flowers flying around, and he thought about burning them. Suddenly, he saw a beautiful girl in an elegant dress rise from the table. Not recognizing her as his sister, Louis came to the conclusion that he was facing a real fairy. All the maids around him, along with Louise, looked at him dumbfounded, puzzled by what they heard. Sitting down at the table, the hero looked at his sister as if he was trying to burn a hole in her with one look. First of all, the heroine did not know how to address him, informally or officially. With a sudden change in his face, Louis greeted Her Majesty, believing that they had not seen each other for a long time. Realizing that it was worth communicating officially, Louisa greeted the Lord happily. The hero apologized for his uninvited visit, and he was grateful that the Empress had taken the time to meet with him. However, for the girl it was a trifle because, after all, they were one family. Grinning maliciously, Louis did not understand how a simple descendant of a noble family could consider himself Her Majesty's family. Deciding to get straight to the point, he put the news brochure on the table, which was the reason for his visit. The Lord could not understand what exactly the main character was up to, which made her confused. According to the hero, if it was all for the sake of the Emperor's favor, then she should have stopped dishonoring the name of Vidal now. The girl was shocked, not understanding why he suddenly decided that she was doing this for the sake of the Emperor. The reason was that, according to Louis, she did not want to divorce Yuri at all. Louise was sincerely sorry that even her family did not believe in the sincerity of her intentions. Then the hero again decided to remind that they were not a family and that he did not have a sister. At first, she had turned her back on the Wadels, and now she had made so much fuss about the divorce that it Louis off. He was not going to follow the lead of the Empress, which finally puzzled the main character. The Lord was sure that she had purposefully chosen the imperial family, neglecting her own. Deciding to leave, he hoped that she would remember his words and not even think about returning to the Waddell family. After all, now, she was not only a member of the imperial family, but also an enemy to all the Vadels. Looking after him, the heroine had the feeling that if she just let him go now, she would never find out anything. She shouted for her brother to stop and ran in his direction. Tripping over a rock, Louisa slammed into his back, wrapping her arms around his waist. Frozen in place, the hero decided to clarify what the girl had just called him. Surprised by such a question, the heroine again called him her brother. At the same moment, Louis flared up like a torch, scaring Louise greatly. But suddenly the fire turned into roses, and pushing his sister away, the Lord ordered her not to touch it. After that, he embarrassedly covered his face with his hands, confusing the heroine. Looking at him carefully, the girl's eyes suddenly sparkled. She immediately began to circle around Louis, hugging him and calling him her brother. The completely embarrassed hero decided that even this does not change anything. The heroine did not understand why he was so cold, after all. They had not seen each other for 10 years. Moving away from her, Louis looked furiously at his sister, who was the first to turn away from her family. This puzzled the Empress even more, who didn't understand what he was even talking about. But the hero knew for sure that she had never tried to contact them, so it was time to stop playing happy family. Louise was shocked to learn that she had never tried to contact her family. The hero found it funny how the heroine resolutely tried to deny it. Over the past 10 years, he must have sent 1,000 letters to his sister, hoping to find out how she was doing. However, she never replied to a single letter, even when he begged for a one-line reply. So now it was too late to fix anything, and looking contemptuously at Louise, Louis went home. Looking after him, the girl did not understand why the original heroine decided to break off ties with her family. Later, thinking about it, she remembered that Louise missed her family for the rest of her life, and something clearly did not add up. All this made her dizzy, and Ruel thought she was completely insane. He wasn't surprised by this, given the crazy things the Empress had been doing lately. A few minutes ago, out of pity, she offered to help him with the documents, not thinking that he would agree. However, now she had to sort out 12.5 stacks of documents with him. At some point, the Chancellor wondered how the heroine's meeting with Louis went. Louise was surprised that he called her brother by name, as it meant that they were in a close relationship. As it turned out, they studied together, and Ruel was the best in the Faculty of Science, and Louis was the best among the knights. The hero knew that the children of the Vidal family were excellent with the sword, and was also sure that if it were not for the wedding, Louise would also have graduated from the academy. Since she was good at administrative affairs, she could enter the Ruel department. The Chancellor wondered what exactly they were doing during the meeting. The heroine remembered that they parted on a not very good note, and her brother was angry that she did not answer his letters for 10 years. Hearing this, the maids were horrified and cried out that it was not true. According to them, she's been sending letters to the family since childhood, at least 3 every week. And it was her relatives who behaved as if the girl did not exist, not deigning to answer a single letter. Realizing that both sides had written letters but no one had received them, Louise came to the horrible conclusion that someone had intercepted them. Having also made this conclusion, Ruel thought that someone wanted to completely cut off the heroine's connection with her family. However, it was clear that very few could intercept the letters right in the palace. It was immediately possible to remove Emperor Yuri from the suspects, since he was too stupid for this. And it was definitely not Lyra, since letters began to disappear 10 years ago, and she appeared in the palace only 5 years ago. Deciding not to guess in vain, the heroine intended to set traps in the future. After a while, Lord Louis sat in his estate, looking thoughtfully out the window. Suddenly, the butler informed him of the visitor's arrival, much to the lord's surprise. When he learned that he had been sent personally by the Empress, the hero was confused. Coming to the living room and seeing the messenger, the hero was greatly puzzled by the unexpected guest. Struggling to withstand his fierce gaze, Ruel timidly greeted his old comrade. The lord didn't understand why the imperial chancellor had come to see him in the first place. Hearing that he himself doubted the adequacy of his actions, Louis turned around and began to leave. Then Ruel admitted that someone had been stealing letters from the imperial palace for 10 years, which is why the hero suddenly stopped. It was for this reason that the lord did not receive a letter for 10 years. From the look on Louis's face, Ruel immediately saw how much he loved his sister. The heir to House Waddell was the most important troublemaker, hooligan, and bully of the empire. However, in the first 7 years of his life, he had a very different heart. When he learned that Louise had been taken away by the imperial family, he left the academy that same year, stunned by this. Then the future chancellor simply condemned him, not knowing the whole picture of what was happening. However, now the empress was making every effort to deal with the entire situation that had arisen over the past 10 years. In addition, Louis clearly did not hate her, so he had to stop acting like a child. At the same moment, the table next to the chancellor burst into flames, causing him to jump away in horror. The butler quickly extinguished it, and Ruel thought that the hero's wife must possess the element of water. Continuing the conversation, the chancellor admitted that they had narrowed down the circle of suspects and only one remained, but they are not yet sure. The hero wondered what his comrade was going to do now because surely he had a plan. As for the plan, at the moment the empress was heading directly to the suspect. Hearing this, the lord's eyes clouded with the horror and rage that gripped him. He was furious when he learned that Ruel had sent the child alone to an unknown and dangerous place. However, the chancellor did not consider her fragile at all, but on the contrary, he was sure that she was the devil in the flesh. At the same moment, his chair caught fire, after which the butler poured a bucket of water on him with lightning speed. Grabbing Ruel by the collar, the hero demanded that he be taken to his sister immediately. Meanwhile, Louise's headmaid hurriedly descended the stairs, hoping to catch the messenger in time. She gave him a letter from the empress, which urgently needed to be given to Lord Vidal. Taking the letter and mounting his horse, the messenger hurried forward under the watchful eye of the maid. At the same time, Louise was standing nearby, hiding behind a tree, and together with the maid, they went after the messenger. Arriving at the palace of the emperor's mother, the messenger handed a letter to the heroine, Her Majesty's chief servant. The woman did not understand whether the empress was really so stubborn or maybe just stupid. The messenger tried to be careful, fearing that he might be caught, but the maid was sure that Louisa was too stupid for that. And even if they were caught, the emperor's mother was on their side, and the little empress would not be able to do anything. At that moment, Louise appeared, wondering if they were really talking about her. The messenger was horrified, looking at the heroine with fear, and unable to find words to justify himself. Looking innocent, the maid thought it was a simple misunderstanding. Louise was surprised that a woman dared to say such a thing when she was caught by the hand. At this moment, the maidservant of the emperor's mother looked at her with a look of disdain. The heroine responded in kind, realizing that an ordinary maid has no right to look at the empress like that. The woman began to speed up the empress for shamelessly breaking into the palace of the emperor's mother in her absence. The girl could not understand whether the maid really thought that she and a simple messenger could steal the empress's letters. The woman admitted that she could not return the message to her, as it was a direct order from the mistress. From this, Louise deduced that the emperor's mother had ordered them to commit a theft, which made the maid furious. But as soon as the girl wondered if the emperor knew about this, the maid immediately calmed down and fell into a stupor. Turning around, the heroine decided that if His Highness really did not know, then she should go to him right now and report. She wondered if the emperor's mother had really gone to such lengths to separate them from their family. It would be wiser to use it to gain the favor of the Waddles. Turning back to the servants, the empress decided to give them one last chance to return the letter. Snatching the letter from the hands of the maid, the messenger ran to the empress to give it back. He initially believed that all this was wrong, but no one listened to him. He apologized to Her Highness, admitting that he simply had no other choice, since there was an order from the emperor's mother. However, the heroine calmed him down, because she had already given them a chance, and now Louise wanted to get all the letters stolen for 10 years. The messenger immediately hurried to carry out the order, remembering that they were somewhere in the palace. The maid was horrified, realizing that the former empress would blow his head off when she found out. At this time, Louise's chief servant arrived, bringing with her a detachment of knights. Looking furiously at the woman, the heroine immediately gave the order to lock her up. The maid began to desperately appeal to her sanity, for she was a personal service to the emperor's mother. And if the mistress found out what Louise had done to her, there would surely be consequences. Smiling back, the girl thought that she would definitely deal with it. The maid was shocked when she realized that the heroine was not afraid of her mistress. However, if Louise had been afraid, she would not have started all this in the first place. Suddenly, the woman chuckled, thinking that Her Highness probably wanted to visit that room again. And the maid wondered if the empress would be all right then. The heroine did not understand why the original Louise tolerated such an attitude towards herself. In any case, it was time to move on as hunger began to come. As soon as the girls returned to their palace, the maids suddenly introduced the guest of the Imperatriza, Lady Lyra. The heroine was surprised by the appearance of this cunning fox, thinking that she probably would not rest today. In a curtsy, the girl bowed to the Empress and greeted her joyfully. Sitting down at the table, Louisa hoped that the unexpected guest would be brief, since she was very tired. As it turned out, Lyra just wanted to apologize for what had happened recently. She behaved disrespectfully towards the Empress, as she was not informed that Yuri himself had summoned her. The heroine pretended to understand her anxiety, because the Emperor was busy all the time. And if Lyra was done with this, she had better leave as soon as possible before the tea was brought. The girl began to apologize even more, and then Louise decided to find out if she wanted to say something else. In fact, Lyra was curious to know what she and His Highness were discussing back then. However, she could have asked the Emperor himself if he did not want to tell her. Lyra immediately lost her temper, thinking that he was always telling her everything, but now he was just busy and she didn't want to bother him. Louise admitted that Yuri wanted to talk about her request for a divorce. She proposed again and he refused. Feeling incredibly terrified, the girl did not understand why His Highness refused her. But the heroine herself did not know the answer to this question, and she wanted it to turn out to be a lie. Shuddering with horror, Lyra decided to clarify what the heroine plans to do now. Louise understood from her question that the Emperor had clearly decided not to let his mistress know that she was looking for a lover. The girl understood that because of her, the heroine and His Highness had moved away from each other. Having applauded her, Louise was glad and surprised because she thought that it would take Lyra 10 years to realize this. Falling at her feet, the girl really wanted to make friends with the Empress, as well as serve her. She was sure that they would be able to get along because they both had younger brothers and sisters. Now, Lyra spoke the same way as the Emperor, but according to the girl, she was just trying to understand him. She was quite content with her position as the Emperor's concubine, and did not want to encroach on the Empress's place at all. Then Louise reminded her that the real world is not a fairy tale, and a happy ending always means sacrifices. Lyra and Yuri inadvertently demanded sacrifices from her, and then pretended that she rejected their goodwill. Saddened, the girl decided that Her Highness was too harsh. Louise was strange to hear such a thing about someone who was having a completely rational conversation with her own husband's mistress. Unable to stand it, Lyra screamed, considering her cruel, and if the heroine had initially compromised, then everything would have been fine. Louise thought that it was rather selfish of her to talk about compromise while trying to take everything away from the Empress. Suddenly, the main character rethought this conversation, not understanding why she was arguing with her at all. First of all, she clarified that this was indeed Lyra's first visit to the Rose Palace. The girl found it incredibly spacious, luxurious, and majestic. In that case, Louise wondered if Lyra would like to stay here. Seeing the shock in the girl's eyes, the Empress decided to clarify if Lyra wanted to become the lady of the Flower Palace. Louise knew that she would never be able to persuade the Emperor, as long as it was in his interest, that she should remain in the palace. With Lyra, everything was different, but the girl realized that Her Highness had said this on purpose. In her opinion, if she agreed, Louise would immediately tell the Emperor that she was aiming for the place of the Empress. Lyra was also sure that the Empress was greatly mistaken, considering her stupid. Then the heroine remembered how the girl had previously believed that she was completely satisfied with being a concubine of the Emperor. But what happens if she suddenly becomes pregnant, because her child will never inherit the throne? Because she was not an empress, and Louise's child, even if she was younger, would receive the throne in any case. Lyra's child will be forced to be in the shadow of her child for the rest of his life. Believing that she is satisfied with being a concubine, does she realize that then her children will be in constant oppression? Perhaps Lyra herself can live like this for the rest of her life, but is she ready to subject her children to such a fate? Therefore, she should stop pretending to be a sheep, because ambitious people are better than hypocrites. The girl did not understand what all these cruel words were for, and did the Empress not care about other people's suffering? However, it was Lyra who continued to behave arrogantly and all-powerful, although she was only the Emperor's mistress. Enraged by such words, the girl shouted that Yuri promised to marry her and then she would become his official wife. Smiling, the heroine thought that she would start calling her the emperor's wife after their wedding, but for now she was just a mistress. Lyra began to cry, thinking that she had come here to make friends, and her highness was saying such cruel words. The empress's maids standing nearby were confused by her tears. Suddenly, Yuri ran out from behind the bushes and rushed towards them, furiously shouting Louise's name. Seeing the tears of his mistress, he did not understand what his wife dared to do. Lyra pretended not to understand how he ended up here, and the heroine continued to look at them calmly. The emperor wanted Lyra to confess to him at once whether Louise had offended her. But the girl thought that her highness had done nothing of the sort. She was just not good enough. Ironically exhaling, Louise was once again delighted with Lyra's incredible acting. However, Yuri demanded to know what the empress had said that had brought his mistress to trembling. The heroine pretended not to know. Maybe she was trembling because the sun was setting and it was already cold? The emperor did not understand how she could be so shameless, for she must have called Lyra here to throw mud at her. In response, Louise honestly admitted that the girl herself came to her, but Yuri considered her words to be a lie, deciding that she really asked for a divorce to get rid of Lyra. Thinking that it would be great to hit him, Louise suddenly saw a familiar figure and jumped up abruptly. After that, she fell to her knees in front of the emperor, confusing him. Being shocked, Yuri thought that she had finally decided to apologize, although it was already too late. Looking at him coldly, the heroine wanted him to stop talking this nonsense. After that, she immediately began to demonstratively cry, which further puzzled those around her. Running to her, the maids began to calm the mistress, wiping away her tears. The emperor shouted that he would not forgive her, even if she sobbed on her knees before him. Lyra supported him because the heroine was the first to be rude to her, and now she wanted to make her look guilty. Louise did not understand how he could say that. After all, they had lived together for 10 years, and he believed the words of this girl. The emperor was outraged that she was also accusing him, even though she just needed to behave appropriately in the first place. The empress did not understand whether she really deserved to live locked up like a toy and clean up after him forever. All in tears, she demanded to know why he had married her in the first place. Enraged, Yuri screamed, citing the reason for receiving a child with the blood of the Videls. This was the only purpose of the heroine's existence, and it meant nothing more to him. Seeing how she drooped, the emperor reached out to grab her by the hair, but Louise began to chuckle at that moment. At the same moment, Louis grabbed Yuri's hand, frightening the emperor with his aura. The hero was like an angry bull and did not understand what this bastard allowed himself. Seeing him, the emperor felt an icy chill run down his spine and decided to clarify how he ended up here. Then Louis decided to find out if he was really forbidden to be here, so Yuri shook his head in fear. Louise hadn't expected him to come so quickly, but now the advantage was on her side. Looking at her satisfied face, Lyra froze in place with horror and incomprehension. The heroine wondered if she really thought that she was the only one here who could cry like that. Louis immediately hurried to his sister, wondering why she sat down on the cold floor. Shocked by her disheveled appearance, he accidentally set fire to a nearby table and caused a small explosion. He decided to clarify, was it the emperor who upset her so much or the girl standing next to him? Mad with fear, Yuri shouted that she had suddenly burst into tears, and it was Louise who had first brought Lyra to tears. However, even if Louise was the first to offend her, the hero did not see this as a problem at all. His sister was an empress, and that girl was just a mistress. Louis was shocked that Louise had been treated like this all this time and she hadn't even told him anything. Trying to explain, the heroine could barely squeeze a couple of words through her tears. She herself did not understand why, not being the real Louise, she could not hold back her tears. At that moment, Roel appeared with a messenger bringing with them a bag of stolen letters. Yuri was shocked to learn that these letters were hidden in his mother's palace. The messenger admitted that all this time the former empress had ordered the theft of messages sent from the Flower Palace. The emperor was completely confused, not understanding how his mother could order such a thing. Seeing Louis's gaze on him, Yuri immediately tried to justify that he did not know anything about it. Then the hero wondered, wasn't the girl standing next to him a simple doll? Although, if Lyra was so empty-headed, then she was not much different from a doll. Hearing these words, the emperor was indignant but could not say anything in response, and Lyra trembled even more. Realizing that Yuri values this woman, the hero apologized for his rudeness, and on that note, he decided to take his sister back to Waddell. In addition, now their family intends to participate in the divorce process, which begins from this moment. Panic swept over the emperor, and he believed that since Louise was an empress, she could not leave without a good reason. As far as Louis knew, Yuri's mother had been living in the family estate for several days, where she hid her lover. Hearing this and that he looked like his mother, the emperor gnashed his teeth in indignation. The heroine was surprised by the offer to go right now, and the hero wondered if she really wanted to stay here. Not understanding how he could have thought of such a thing, Louise immediately took her brother's hand joyfully. After that, they bowed out, and Louis reminded Yuri that the Waddell estate was far away. He also knew that his sister had already submitted all the divorce papers and wanted the emperor to send them as soon as he agreed. Seeing that even His Highness couldn't stop them, Louise wondered at the power of the Waddells and didn't understand why she was stuck here before. Calling out to her, her brother decided to apologize for being so late. He was also very sorry for being so rude when they had recently met. Seeing the tears in her eyes again, Louis thought that she was no longer a child, and it was time for her to stop crying. He immediately helped her wipe away all her tears, noticing how much she had grown. However, he was sure that deep down she would always remain his little Louise. The heroine could hardly believe in this, and her brother decided that she had always been and would always be Louise Waddell. Realizing that she was not Louise, the heroine experienced very strange sensations. Louis's words made her feel like she had become one with the original Louise. The hero decided that it was time to return, especially since all the news had probably already reached his father. Suddenly, Louise only now realized that she would meet the Duke of Waddell for the first time. Meanwhile, at the Waddell Manor, a servant hurried to his master to give him the latest news. After learning from others that the Duke had important things to do, he thought that how could this be more important than Louis? After all, even if the Lord beat the Emperor, Duke Waddell was now spending time with portraits of the Duchess and Lady Louise. He had this precious time only once a day, so it was urgent. Therefore, if the servant wanted to live to old age, he had to be patient and wait. Finding this ridiculous, the servant asked them to tell their master that Lady Louisa was returning home with Lord Louis. At the same moment, the door leading to the Duke exploded, creating a powerful wave of energy. From the smoke and ashes came the formidable figure of the Duke, who wanted the servant to repeat his words. Meanwhile, while in the family estate, the Emperor's mother struck her maid. She ordered to immediately take away this stupid woman who could not even serve tea normally. Remembering the beauty of her musicians, the former Empress Marilyn ordered to call them in order to cheer herself up. Then one of the servants decided to inform the lady that vile rumors about her were being spread among the people. Namely, that she summons musicians in order to discreetly enjoy obscenities. Enraged by what she heard, Marilyn ordered those who spread such rumors to be brought to her immediately. Hearing that this was almost impossible, she thought that the servant was looking down on her since she had been a commoner before. Grabbing him by the collar, she thought that even if she came from a humble family, she was now in the highest position. Therefore, the servant had to go and immediately find the rumors and then punish them. At that moment, another servant ran into them, who brought an urgent letter from the Emperor. Horrified by what she read in it, she immediately ordered to start packing her things and prepare to return to the capital. Marilyn was shocked and confused, not understanding what had happened there during her absence. At this time, sitting in the carriage, the heroine was not sure that she could just go home in this form. Louis felt that there was nothing to worry about, except that he was a little worried about the Emperor's mother. Louise knew that usually the Emperor and Empress had more power than their parents, so why was she so feared? However, the hero was sure that he and his father would protect her, and his sister had nothing to fear. But this was the catch, because if the brother was so crazy, then what can we say about the father of the family? Suddenly, the hero remembered that he had forgotten to tell someone that he was going to take Louise with him. As it turned out, it was about his friend and guest, who was staying at the Waddell estate for the time being, which, however, did not mean anything to the girl. Suddenly, an escort appeared from the window and began to point his finger in the direction of the Waddell castle. Looking at him through the window, the heroine did not understand what it was in front of her. Along the beautiful streets, there was a view of the majestic castle, similar to a huge mountain, striking in its scale. Louise had heard of the Wadels' impressive fortune before, but had not thought of seeing a more noble family than the royal family. The hero knew that she would probably not like the gloomy appearance of the Black Castle, since she was supposed to look only at beautiful things. Therefore, he decided to ask his father to repaint the castle pink, but the heroine hastened to refuse. As it turned out, the Wadel estate was on the outskirts of Owen, and a border wall separated them. Beyond the mountain, behind the castle, was a plain that was a conflict territory, and beyond it was the Tristan Empire. The castle was deliberately made gloomy to hide the traces of fires, because the Vadels often, unintentionally, use their powers. The heroine wondered if she could learn how to use a fire elemental. The hero nodded approvingly. After all, she was also a member of the Vadel family. However, creating a bond with an elemental was not so easy, and there was a lot to go through. In the meantime, the servant announced their arrival, and as it turned out, the Duke decided to meet them in person. As he led Louise out of the carriage, Louis felt that she was not well. But the heroine was just a little worried about what would happen if her father suddenly did not like her. The servants, along with the Lord, immediately laughed, thinking that Lady Louise had a bad sense of humor. The heroine was greeted by hundreds of people, rejoicing at her return and showering the path with flower petals. Those around her congratulated her on her divorce and hoped that now the life of the mistress would be filled with happiness. Duke Louis de Vadel stood in the middle of the road, arms outstretched for a hug. Louise concluded that everyone was looking forward to a beautiful father-daughter reunion. Due to her age, she didn't really want to do it, but she needed a good relationship with the Duke. Running to him with her arms outstretched, she began to call for her daddy. When she was next to him, the Duke suddenly fell to his knees, clutching his chest. Louister asked the butler if he had heard the words from her lips, too. His daughter had just called him Dad, and she had just been a baby and called him Baba. While everyone around him congratulated him on such a touching moment, Louise was shocked because she was married off at 8. At that moment, Louis approached and reported to his father that the imperial family refused to cooperate, so the marriage was formally in force. Anger immediately appeared on his father's face, and he looked at his son in bewilderment. In addition, according to the Lord, Yuri shamelessly entered Louise's palace with his mistress and made a scene there. The Duke immediately ran up to his daughter, wanting to know if she had really been treated like this. He didn't understand how this wretched bastard could treat his precious daughter like that. Louise had nothing to worry about anymore because her daddy intended to protect her from everyone. His brother was also ready for this, and coming up from behind, he gently embraced his sister and father. The heroine could not even think that she would have a family on which she could rely. She apologized, believing that she should have come to them earlier. His brother was furious when he heard this, because it was all the fault of these imperial scum. The father agreed with him, thinking that he should not have carried out the order of the emperor, but rather staged a rebellion. He was shocked that he had not seen his own daughter for 10 years, but fortunately everything was over. Louise decided that now they would start with a clean slate and bright days ahead of them. A little later, several maids escorted the heroine to the guest room, where she would temporarily live while her chambers were finished. Her father had ordered Louise's chambers to be the best, but even the guest room was more luxurious than her former palace. One of the maids was moved to tears by these words, a little puzzled the heroine. The head maid introduced herself by the name of Amilene and wanted the lady to contact her on any matter. The other 2 maids were Beth and Katie, and they were Louise's personal maids. It was an honor for them because before that, they had only seen her in portraits. Realizing that the girl must have been tired from the journey, the maids hurried to show her everything. And after a short time, Louise safely plopped down on a large bed and wrapped the sausage in a blanket. Closing her eyes, she knew that this was probably a happy ending. A few hours later, she woke up to the fact that the window was open and the wind flew into the room. A man standing in front of her bed didn't understand why Louis was sleeping there. Taking off his shirt, the stranger thought that the hero was clearly overloading him with the 3rd expedition this month. Exposing his torso, the man remembered that Louis had visited the capital not so long ago. The girl was quietly horrified and thought that if this was a murderer, then why would he undress? Sitting down on the bed, the stranger did not understand why the hero did not give any answer. Wanting an answer from Louis, he leaned forward, finding himself above the heroine. At this moment, he finally saw Louise's face, confused. At that moment, she tried to scream, but the young man abruptly put his fingers to her lips. He knew she wouldn't believe him, but there was one little misunderstanding. And now he was ready to let her go if she promised not to scream, after which Louise nodded. But as soon as he moved his fingers slightly away from her mouth, the heroine's deafening scream pierced the entire castle. A few seconds later, a frightened Duke, Louis, and several servants burst in. When they saw a half-naked Regan and a tear-stained Louise, they fell into a stupor. The next day, the heroine listened to the indignation of the maids directed towards the night pervert. The girls did not understand how it was possible to just remain calm in such a situation. Peeling the apple, the Duke wanted them to stop saying that because it frightened his daughter. The maids immediately apologized, and Louise pretended that everything was fine. She wondered where Louis had gone, since he had not been seen since the morning. The Duke believed that there was no need to worry about his son because he was probably solving some business again. As Louister began to feed his daughter apples, he thought that after the meal they could go for a walk together. Louise gladly accepted his offer, thinking in her mind about who this stranger was last night. At this time, sitting tied up on a wooden chair, Regan was sure that he was not to blame. Louis was surprised by his words because he did not even know how to ask anything. Then the hero thought that the Lord might need to remove this fire in his hand. Suddenly, Regan laughed, causing Louis to think he was insane. As it turned out, the reason for the laughter was that Louise was different from the little girl he remembered. The Lord considered it natural because 10 years had passed since their last meeting, and he did not understand why the hero decided to arrange demonstrations of his body in his sister's room. Regan was also frightened then and was sure that the heroine would hate him now. But Louis thought that she rather thought he was frostbitten, and in any case, everyone thought that Regan was a mercenary. Because of this, the Duke stood guard all night near his daughter's room. Realizing that it was necessary to assign a guard in advance, the Lord ordered to untie Regan. Considering this a great idea, the hero expressed a desire to become Louise's bodyguard. Louis immediately refused, deciding that he would never let him near his sister. Then Regan decided to clarify who, instead of the Lord, went to the lands of the Zenoa to fight magical creatures for 3 whole months. In addition, Louis promised him with his lips to fulfill any wish upon his return. Regan could not even think that the son of the most famous duke in the empire was just throwing words to the wind. Meanwhile, Yuri and Lyra were meeting Marilyn, who had just arrived. The woman was furious and did not understand how her son could be such an idiot. After all, she had told him 100 times that he could have a mistress, but he should not lose Louise. The emperor wanted to talk at home, alone, but this only angered his mother even more. She was shocked that after he had missed such an opportunity, he had the courage to call himself emperor. Yuri did not want to discuss all this now, while they were being watched, and was sure that he would decide everything himself. Then Marilyn began to demand that he immediately return the Empress today. She didn't care how he did it, even if her son had to crawl on his knees and promise never to have a mistress again. Lyra stood behind Yuri and did not understand why they should listen to all this. In her opinion, it was all because of Louise, who behaved only in a way that was convenient for her. Grudging her teeth with anger, the girl thought that perhaps the Empress was now beside herself with joy. At that moment, while eating a cake in a beautiful garden, Louise accidentally dropped a strawberry on the ground. Suddenly, her brother appeared, leading a man she immediately recognized. It turned out to be the same friend who had stayed with the Duke for some reason. Gathering his will into a fist, Louis decided that from that day on the hero would become her personal bodyguard. Louise was shocked by her brother's words because he was the same night pervert. After bowing to his mistress, Regan looked forward to serving her. After a while, the heroine burst into her daddy's office wanting to complain to him. Hearing that Louis had done something wrong, the Duke put down the newspaper and looked at his daughter seriously. At that moment, Louise realized that if she told everything now, Louis would be in big trouble. Then she pretended that her brother had eaten her cake, causing her father's eyes to glow with righteous rage. It seemed to the heroine that the father was already ready to finish off his son, so it was impossible to set up her brother like that. She tried all day, unsuccessfully, to avoid the guard who was following her around. Eventually, she was able to escape from him by climbing a tall tree. The hero settled down near his roots, thinking that she could sit there as long as she wished. At that moment, Louise realized that she had dug her own grave, but there was nothing she could do. She remembered that the guard seemed to be friends with her brother, and she wondered what they had in common. As it turned out, the hero owed his life to the Lord for many years. The heroine was surprised that Louis managed to help this pervert. As if reading her thoughts, the guard considered it a misunderstanding because he simply made a mistake in the room. Louise then wondered why he had entered through the window in the first place, because if he had used the door, everything would have looked more normal. The hero thought that if she didn't believe in his friendship with the Lord, she could just ask the butler. The girl knew in her mind that if Louis himself had recommended him, then it could really be a simple misunderstanding. The guard remembered how he had an accident while being chased near the Waddle estate. He was betrayed by his own family, and if the Duke hadn't found him, they wouldn't be talking now. The heroine was surprised that he said this with a smile, because it must have been very hard for him. However, the guard was just used to being hated by everyone, and it was easier to just give up and not rely on anyone. But Louise thought differently, and felt that giving up was both embarrassing and hurtful. After all, there will always be someone who will help and cover your back at the most difficult moment. The hero was surprised and thought, what if the mistress covers his back? After that, the main character stared at him dumbfounded for a few seconds. She didn't understand why he was talking to her as if they were old friends, especially if he himself expressed a desire to be her personal knight. In response, the hero only laughed heartily, which puzzled her even more. Louise was outraged, thinking that he was just laughing at her. She had been the first to turn down such an offer, so now she was just his friend's little sister. After a little thought, Louise came to the conclusion that it was really possible, so to speak. Smiling, the hero decided that since she refused, he simply had no other choice. He didn't want her to take offense at Louis because he himself insisted on becoming her knight. The heroine was shocked, because if she had known earlier that he could leave so easily, she would not have climbed this tree. However, the hero did not want to force her to do what she did not want at all. Suddenly, a large explosion rang out behind him, from which Louis was rapidly approaching them. Covered in tears, the Lord sincerely hoped that his sister would forgive him for everything. Surprised by his appearance, the girl accidentally slipped off the branch and began to fall down. The thought was spinning in her head that had she escaped death from overwork in order to just die from a fall now? Suddenly, she felt the guard's arms wrap around her, catching her in flight. The hero hoped that she was not injured anywhere and carefully lowered the heroine to the ground. Louis, who ran to them, only wanted to know if his sister was okay. He was horrified that he had just caused her to fall out of a tree. Louise immediately hurried to calm her brother because he had nothing to do with it and she was safe. Hugging his sister, Louis hoped that she was asking him for scaring her without really explaining anything. The girl also apologized in response because she then shouted at them and ran away. At that moment, she looked back and saw how the hero turned around and began to leave. The heroine immediately ran to him, admitting and believing that he was not a pervert after all. She apologized for misunderstanding him and why she had run away in vain. However, if her brother trusted him, then Louise was ready to trust the hero. Taken aback by such words, the guard did not even believe what he heard at first. He hoped that she would really not regret her decision in the future. At the same moment, he took her hand and kissed her wrist, wanting to serve his lady. Louise was greatly embarrassed, her eyes rounded at her new knight. Later, over a meal with her family, she finally decided to find out his name. At this moment, the Duke, Louis, and the hero himself looked away thoughtfully, as if they hadn't heard the question. The heroine did not understand. Was it really so difficult to take and say her name? Then the knight decided that the names were not so important, and the Lord supported him, considering the names a mere formality. At this point, Louise thought that her brother should stop calling her name as well. Then the hero decided that why not the mistress call him in a way that would be more convenient for her. But the girl was still against it, because it was an extremely reckless approach to life. After all, he probably had parents who gave him a name, and why not just say it? Suddenly, she remembered the story of the night about how his family betrayed him, and realized that he was pouring salt on the wound. It dawned on her that this was why Louis believed that names didn't matter to support his friend. At this moment, Louise felt a strong rush of admiration for her brother. The heroine wondered if she could address her brother using Louis's diminutive name. Her father was against it, as people would think that she lacked sophistication if she treated her so casually. Louise agreed with a smile, calling her father and thinking that she simply had not gotten out of the habit of life in the Empire. The Duke had been shocked to hear such an address, but now Louise was in the mood to address formally. And yet, the hero needed a name because he became her knight, and she would often address him. Looking at him attentively, Louise suddenly realized that he reminded her of the Emperor. However, unlike Yuri, his hair was more golden and his eyes were purple, and in general, he was very handsome. After a little thought, the heroine decided that she would call him Rayandro. The hero agreed, deciding that it would be better to shorten the name to Rayan. The Duke wondered when the two became so close that his daughter even came up with a name for him. At this moment, Louister was holding a meat knife in his hand and looked very threatening. The girl admitted that by their mutual decision, Rian would now be her personal knight. The Duke was shocked to hear it for the first time, and Louis was covered in beads of sweat. Confused, he demanded that both heroes immediately go to his office. As for Louise, when she had finished eating, she could safely return to her room. In addition, he hoped that his daughter would remember that her father was once a dad forever. Smiling sweetly, the heroine agreed with her dad's words. As they left, Louise's maids breathed a sigh of relief, not understanding how the lady could remain calm with the Duke's gaze. Louise knew that her father and Louis could make anyone feel like they were in a vice, but she was used to it. It was so great here that she had completely forgotten that her divorce was still in progress. And it was necessary to complete it now, while society and the whole situation were on her side. Meanwhile, having brought the heroes to his office, Louister wanted them to explain themselves to him immediately. He didn't understand why the hero had been chosen as Louise's bodyguard without his permission. Casting a sidelong glance at his friend, Louis admitted that he had threatened him. The Duke looked at his son in bewilderment because had he taught him to behave like this? However, in the Lord's opinion, even though the hero had threatened him, he was still a good choice. After all, Marilyn, who was sitting quietly in the estate, quickly returned to the capital after hearing the news about Louise. The heroine was the one who could hide all the flaws of the emperor regarding the legislation of succession to the throne. Then the hero admitted that he himself asked for this, since soon the imperial family would begin to put pressure on Videl. The Duke wondered if this was the guess of the first prince of the empire, Regan Klaus Owen. The hero was happy for the first time in a long time to hear his real name. He was grateful to the Duke's family for saving his life and also for painting while sheltering him. However, Louister did not want to listen to thanks, believing that His Highness was now his debtor. Regan understood this, as well as the fact that their original plan was to wait until Louise came of age. On this day, the Duke wanted to lead a rebellion against the imperial family together with the hero. When the imperial family took the heroine to their place, the Waydell family closed down and did nothing. Questions began to arise, and some believed that the Duke had given up everything because of the loss of his daughter. Others believed that Louister was simply waiting for the right moment to take revenge. But over the course of 10 years, people gradually lost interest in everything, and the story was forgotten. Regan believed that it would not be easy to get a divorce from the emperor, but a change of ruler could be a good pretext. He believed that thinking about a change of government, for the sake of his daughter, was very typical of the Vidells. Louister did not understand why, knowing all this, the hero was still here. As it turned out, she and Louis weren't the only ones who cared about Louise. In order to rescue her from the terrible clutches of Marilyn, Regan was ready to be used. In fact, ever since the day they first met years ago, he had been waiting to meet Louise again. But the girl herself managed to escape from the palace even before they came for her. After listening to the hero's sweet words, the Duke immediately wanted to forget them, and the Lord pretended not to hear anything at all. Suddenly a servant ran up to them, bringing urgent news from the imperial palace. They demanded the immediate return of the Empress to her rightful place. At the same moment, the imperial message burst into bright flames, right in the hands of the servant, causing him to cry out. The Duke was furious, wondering how, after what had been done to his daughter, they also dared to ask for her to be returned. Louis was in complete agreement with him, believing that now that the Emperor's mother had returned, they wanted to take on Louise again. Louister considered their actions unforgivable and decided that he would not allow them to get away with it. At the same moment, the Lord came up with a plan and remembered that he had a good friend in the palace. Hearing that the cocky and violent Louis had a friend, everyone present was taken aback. After a while, when the night had covered everything around, the servant came to the chancellor's office, wanting to give him a letter from Lord Vidal. Entering the office and seeing a hunched, half-dead man who vaguely resembled Ruel, the servant froze in place with confusion. Having received the letter, the chancellor began to study it attentively, his eyes clouded from processing. After a few seconds, he suddenly began to laugh, confusing the servant. But when he saw the endless mountains of accounting that needed to be worked with, the smile had already left his face. Taking the document out of his desk, he decided that it was finally time to use it. After that, the hero headed for the exit, which greatly surprised the servant because there was still a lot of work to do. Smiling at him, Roel confessed that he was in a hurry to meet with the emperor. Coming to Yuri, the hero reported on his decision to resign from the post of chancellor. The emperor was seized with horror and shock, and he shouted at Ruel in confusion. But it turned out that the hero was simply tired of enduring all this because they were drowning in work after the departure of the empress. At this moment, Yuri remembered that Louise also couldn't take it anymore, so she wanted to be overthrown. From early childhood, the emperor was raised as a second prince, and he could even think that power would be in his hands. He had never been groomed for such a role, so it was overwhelming for him. The people were dissatisfied with his incompetence, and many began to express their concerns. After her marriage, Louise began to study imperial affairs and soon took it upon herself completely instead of Yuri. And if at least one sacrifices himself, then all the others can be calm and happy. Now, more than ever, the emperor understood the meaning of not missing water until the well dried up. Realizing that he was finished without Louise and Ruel, he gave his resolute refusal to the chancellor's request for dismissal. But it didn't matter to the hero, because he signed his employment contract with the previous emperor, so now it is invalid. In Owen, those born after the second son cannot be considered heirs, they are simply not recognized. Therefore, the first and second sons were lucky to be content with all the privileges of heirs. The rest, born after, do not even deserve to be considered family members. There were 5 children in the Reuel family. The hero himself was the second, and their family was extremely friendly. But because of this rule, his 2 younger brothers had to go to a monastery. His parents face a dilemma every day because they love all their sons equally, so they were against the monastery. But one day, Reuel attracted the attention of the emperor and began to work in the palace, which is why the 3rd son was able to take his place. However, at the same time, the 4th son still remained on the sidelines, like an outcast. Therefore, the hero made a deal with the former emperor, swearing allegiance to him in exchange for status for his younger brother. But as soon as Yuri ascended the throne, this agreement instantly expired. And all the loyalty of the chancellor was solely for the sake of the previous emperor. Yuri did not understand why Ruel was saying this only now, since he had come to the throne a long time ago. As it turned out, the hero just did not stop thinking about it from time to time, and now, looking back, he realized that he must have crossed the boundaries. However, Roel couldn't just leave his dear friend's sister alone here. Of course, he could not directly talk and help her, but the hero helped a little from behind the scenes. Realizing that by dear friend he meant Louis, the emperor was horrified. Riel believed that since the empress had left her place, there was no need for him to stay there. After that, he turned around and began to leave. Yuri, in despair, tried to stop him. Turning around for the last time, the hero thought that people begin to appreciate only when they lose. After thanking the emperor and taking his leave, he began to leave, wishing good luck to his highness. The next day, Louise decided that she would choose lovers who would definitely be allowed into the flower palace. Hearing this, her maids blushed with embarrassment and fell into a state of shock. At that moment, Regan leaned over her, wanting to clarify what she had said about lovers. The girl thought that he was too close, but in the hero's opinion, the guards were usually at this distance. The knight took a step back, and the heroine could not understand why he continued to stand over her soul. Seeing boxes with a letter next to her, Regan wondered if the emperor had sent gifts. As it turned out, the letter talked about how much the emperor missed her and wanted Louise to return. The girl looked at this message with disgust, not understanding why he suddenly decided to be so kind. She immediately ordered the main servant, Amilene, to return this letter to the sender. Looking at all this, Regan concluded that she really hated the emperor. He wondered what Louise was going to do after the divorce. The heroine was surprised by such a question, deciding that she would like to stay with her family. Given the way her father and brother treated her, this boded well for the future. However, first of all, after the end of the divorce, she would just like to relax. Then the hero wondered if she plans to get married again someday. Right now, she didn't have any thoughts about it at all, but in the future, she couldn't guarantee anything. Life is unpredictable, and if she really meets a person whom she sincerely loves, then anything can happen. Smiling, Reagan decided to clarify what type of men was ideal for her. After thinking for a while, Louise decided that it must be a slightly rich man who had a little power. In addition, he must be able to listen to her at least a little. After rethinking what was said, the girl came to the conclusion that she really has high standards. But the most important thing was that she didn't want to mess with the royal blood anymore, even under the pretext of death. Taken aback by this turn, Reagan decided to clarify the reason for this decision. According to the heroine, nothing good could be expected from the royal blood, but the hero believed that not everyone was like Yuri. In fact, it was just an excuse, because the true reason for such a decision was a prophecy. The person who can get her will become the ruler of the entire continent. Of course, she decided that she didn't want to deal with the royal family anymore, but in fact, she was referring to Yuri. After all, when the prophecy comes true, the imperial family will not leave her alone. Therefore, right now, this prophecy was the biggest problem of all. Louise wondered what Rayan thought about this and whether he would be able to bribe the priests. According to the hero, this was a very brave request, which was to be expected from a member of the Vidal family. At this moment, the heroine remembered about lovers and wanted Amelin to bring applications. The maidservant, who believed with all her heart that it was just a joke, was horrified by this request. Bringing a stack of documents to Louise, Amelin was also surprised by the number of proposals received. The heroine herself did not expect that there would be so many of them. Perhaps it was all about a tempting salary. However, Amelin was firmly convinced that all the men were simply in love with her mistress. For starters, Louise decided not to take many lovers, limiting the number to 10, which shocked everyone. But the girl was determined to drive what was happening to madness in order to get a divorce. Of course, she was not going to do anything obscene with her lovers. The main thing was to put them on display. Listening to all this, Reagan mysteriously fell silent, and Louise wondered if he too would agree to become her lover. However, the hero thought that everything was fine, because he had already agreed. Hearing this, the heroine looked at him in bewilderment, coming into a stupor. Attracting lovers was a mere formality to ruin a reputation, so anyone would do. However, Rian was her brother's only friend, as well as Louise's personal knight. Rian was a longtime guest of Waddell's house, which means she'll see him every day when she gets home after her divorce. Therefore, no matter what happened, this person was absolutely out of consideration. In addition, the heroine has only now realized that she still does not even know his real name. She turned to him with this question. However, the hero did not want to answer it. The heroine understood that it was her own fault that she arranged the test, allowing her not to disclose information. Reagan wondered what was the reason why he could not become the lover of a young lady. Louise didn't want this because he was a friend of her brother's, which made her feel embarrassed. Hearing this, the hero suddenly decided to move away for a minute, which slightly discouraged the girl. Looking at him suspiciously, she wondered where he had decided to go so suddenly. Looking at her seriously, Reagan decided to break off his friendship with Louis. The heroine immediately rushed to him and embraced him in a strong embrace, wanting to prevent this madness. Her brother already had friends. Count on the fingers of one hand, and she could not allow him to lose a friend. Smiling and understanding her feelings, the hero decided to make a bet with Louise. Earlier, she herself claimed that she would choose about 10 lovers. If Reagan was not among those she chose, he was ready to back down elegantly. Louise immediately found out from Amelin that at the moment she had received 107 applications. In other words, every 10th application could be from a hero, so the girl considered it unlikely that she would choose him. However, the second part of the bet was that if Reagan did become one of them, it would make him the dearest lover. After all, he sincerely wants to become her love and the only one of all. Taken aback by embarrassment, the girl did not understand whether he had just confessed to her. Was he just teasing her? He was too calm to take his words for a confession, but also too affectionate to take them as a joke. Looking at the low chances of his election, she decided to take a chance and accepted the hero's bet. Kissing her hands, Regan was glad, because she promised and she would be able to take back her words. Jumping away in embarrassment, the girl was also glad that he had made a promise and in case of loss, he would simply retreat. First of all, Louisa ordered Emmeline to mark all applicants from House Vidal. In her opinion, Rian had been living in the Vidal house for a long time, which meant he had applied from here, so she had already won. After carefully looking through everything, the headmaid was very surprised, because there was not a single application from this house. The heroine was shocked, thinking that Aileen had imagined herself, but in the lists from the Flower Palace, everything was clear and clear. Looking at them carefully, there really was no one from the Vidal house, which was very strange. Laughing, Regan hoped that she would not retract her words. The only claim that came from the north was from the lands of Zenoa. Emmeline was sure that the hero could not have sent an application from there. Zenoa was a conflict-ridden territory that was still full of monsters and often had outsiders circumambulate the land. In the opinion of the chief servant, if rumors about the mistress had spread even there must have been chaos in the capital. Suddenly, Louise saw a note on this application that the candidate had been unrequitedly in love with a girl for 10 years. She was shocked, because how could he want to be her lover when he himself was in love with someone else? After a little thought, the heroine came to the conclusion that it could work. It seemed that he had applied for a reward, so it would be easier to deal with him later. Louise decided to leave this application as a potential candidate, while Regan stood behind with his hand over his mouth. Seeing how he was shaking, the girl decided that he must be very worried. Confident in her choice, she decided not to look for Rian among the candidates, but to find those who he definitely could not be. Later, at a family meal, she decided to ask her father if she could go to church tomorrow. Louis was surprised, not understanding why she needed to go there so unexpectedly. In addition to the fact that it was necessary to stop the prophecy, the heroine also wanted to get permission from the temple for a divorce. The Duke believed that the support of the temple was a mere formality, but still he did not want to be at enmity with them. However, he wondered how his daughter wanted to do it, and Louise decided that with the help of small gifts. The butler Karen thought that she looked very much like her father, and the Duke himself looked at her with admiration. He decided to personally prepare such gifts so that all the priests would be surprised. Suddenly a servant ran out, bringing another urgent letter from the imperial palace. But the catch was that this time, Marilyn personally sent this letter directly to Louise. Louis didn't care and just wanted the letter, and the Duke thought the servant wanted to ruin his daughter's precious eyes. But Regan believed that since this letter was sent to the heroine, it was up to her to decide what to do with it. The girl agreed and wanted to read it herself, especially since she had just finished the meal. Her father and brother wanted to see her off, but Louisa decided that she could walk to the room herself and they could continue their dinner. Closing the door behind her, the heroine did not know what could happen if they all sat down to read it together. There had already been an incident with letters before, and it seemed that something was happening between her and Marilyn. When she opened the letter, she saw only one question: did the Empress remember that place? Coming to her room and rereading the letter, the heroine was surprised because she thought that there would be something important here. Before taking this as a threat, you had to understand what kind of place it was. And also, it was gentle to figure out what kind of relationship the Emperor's mother had with the Empress. The maids in the palace believed that there was nothing special about their relationship. They had a good enough relationship to get together at least 3 times a week and drink tea. She was the only person in the palace who took care of Louise. But then why did she steal the letters? And also, why did her maid have such strange behavior? Marilyn's personal maid looked down on Louise, even though she was an empress. Not understanding anything, Louisa decided that she should think about the temple now and deal with the rest later. In addition, even if Marilyn holds her for a weak fool, the heroine was determined to dispel this misunderstanding. The next day, as she sat in the carriage and headed to the church, she thought it would be great if her father and brother would go with them. Regan sat next to a satisfied face and realized that the Duke and Lord were busy. Looking at him, Louise knew that this impure knight was clearly glad of this. Before leaving, during breakfast, the butler ran into the dining room and reported problems on the wall of the northern border. And no matter how much her father and brother wanted to 6, they could not leave it and go with the heroine. The hero was glad that the Duke had at least managed to prepare the gift, and Louise wondered what was inside the gift case. Regan was sure that since Leicester himself had prepared this, it meant something special. As he handed over the case, the Duke chuckled enigmatically, thinking that the priests would be furious. This bothered the girl. Besides, she heard some strange sound from inside. Then the hero offered to look there, but Louise was categorically against it because her father strictly ordered not to open it until he arrived. Meanwhile, the heroes were approaching the border of the central temple of the Pantheon and had to walk to the entrance. Stopping at the border, they got out of the carriage, and later, approaching the temple, the girl heard a strange noise. When she saw Rian take a white mask out of her pocket and put it on her face, she was very puzzled. The hero pretended to be embarrassed when people looked at him. Meanwhile, the morning prayer in the temple ended, and a large crowd of people came out of the door. Regan hoped that his companion would be careful and not drown in this gathering. Deciding that it was better for him to think about himself, the heroine took a decisive step forward, leaving the hero behind. Noticing this, she immediately returned to him, thinking that the mask blocked all visibility for the hero. Realizing that she had to hurry, she grabbed him by the arm and dragged him with her, under the surprised looks of others. A golden line was drawn on the ground in front of the entrance, and seeing how they stepped over it, those around froze in amazement. Louise was very puzzled by the looks that people were directing at them. Even inside the temple, they continued to stare at them openly, and whispers could be heard from everywhere. The heroine was annoyed and left at a dead end because it is unlikely that the reason for such views was that she was an empress. Even stranger was the fact that as soon as she looked at someone, they immediately began to blush. At this time, they began to approach the statue of the goddess Beloth, one of the 3 gods in the Owen Empire. They had been walking around for an hour, and Louisa was eager to meet the high priest at last. She was also embarrassed by the fact that from the moment they entered the temple, Rian had been unusually quiet. One of the temple servants said that there were 3 gods on the continent in total. The first was Balwa, who controlled time and the entire earthly world. The second was Vankot, who ruled death and ruled the underworld. The third was the goddess Belet, who commanded the fate of people and their future. Louise wondered if the first 2 were in charge of the earthly and underground realms. Why was Belet the only one in control of fate? As it turned out, the reason was that the goddess was directly responsible for the heavenly realm. Suddenly, the attendant remembered the golden line that had been drawn in front of the entrance to the church. By crossing this line, a person entrusts his fate to Belet, so he must cross it alone. However, this is not the case if a man and a woman cross this line together. According to legend, this means that their fates will be connected and they will never part, and they will also definitely fall in love with each other. Therefore, even lovers should cross the line separately unless they are engaged or married. But if they did it, being just a couple, then this means that the lovers swore to be together for life. Remembering how she desperately pulled the hero with her and crossed the line with him, Louise was stunned. Now she finally understood why everyone around her was looking at them like that and whispering behind their backs. After all, it turned out that the empress, who was still married, had crossed the line while holding hands with another man. She immediately turned her gaze to Rayan, who blushed heavily and turned away, covering his mouth with his hand. People around thought that he was behaving this way because he was embarrassed. But the heroine knew for sure that he was just going to die, restraining himself with all her might. The attendant wondered what kind of relationship Her Highness had with this gentleman. Realizing that she was crucifying Belet about all the ins and outs of Belet because of him, Louise confessed that he was just her personal knight. The attendant was deeply touched to learn of the forbidden love between the lady and her faithful knight. But the heroine considered that it was too ironic to discuss forbidden love in such a place. Turning to Rian, Louise thought that the asshole must have known and hadn't told her. Leaning over to her, the hero pretended to think that she knew about the line and led him through it on purpose. Also assuming that she liked him so much, Regan decided to play along a little. Leaning against her forehead, he defiantly pretended that he did not know what to do now, since they had crossed the line. Pushing him away, the evil heroine decided that she would certainly complain about everything to her dad and brother. At that moment, the doors of the hall swung open and the high priest came out to the heroes, accompanied by the attendants. His name was Kiranhas, and he greeted the empress with respect. It was a great honor for him to visit Her Highness, and he also did not understand why everyone around him had such views. Invited to follow him, Louise found herself in a huge hall with a diamond ceiling. Before that, the heroine thought that the priests threw all their strength into serving the gods, but judging by the luxury, this could play into her hands. Sit the Empress down on the sofa and poured tea. Kyrenis sat down opposite and prepared to listen attentively. Deciding to get straight to the point, Louise admitted that a prophecy related to her would soon arrive in Oram. And the heroine's great request was to change it a little, which made the high priest confused. Clutching his head, he did not understand what all this meant, and how did she even know about the prophecy? It didn't matter, and the Empress just wanted them to do as she said when the prophecy arrived. However, Kyrenis found it difficult because even if it was true, it was illegal to go against God and change the prophecy. But the girl did not want to change anything in its content, and instead she wished that no one would know about it. She herself was well aware that it was illegal to change the content of the prophecy. In the past, when wars were fought for the throne, kings used prophecy for their own purposes. This led to a decrease in confidence in the church and the beginning of persecution of believers. Because of this, laws were later created prohibiting the forgery of prophecies, which even affected kings. Therefore, the heroine only wanted to keep silent about him, considering it a good deal for the temple. Afterward, Regan placed a case on the table, which contained a small token of appreciation from her father. The priests, together with Kyrenis, looked at the case with apprehension, not knowing what to expect. Inside it were a lot of gems, which seemed to Louisa quite trivial for a bribe, but the priests were like lightning and were shocked by so many elemental crystals. Moreover, these copies were of the highest quality, which further discouraged those around them. The heroine saw them for the first time and decided to ask Reen if they were really so valuable. According to the hero, only one such pebble could be compared with the annual income of some noble family. Stupefied, Louise didn't understand how these little pebbles could be so valuable. Kyrenis considered the Duke's gift very generous and decided that it would be impolite to refuse. At the same moment, Regan slammed the case of stones right in front of his nose. The heroine thought that she had not yet received a response from the high priest worthy of this gift. Seeing Kyrenis's serious gaze, she thought that they probably had nothing more to talk about. As she began to leave, the girl thought that this was unfortunate, because she hoped that they would have a warmer relationship. Suddenly, behind her back, a cry was heard from the high priest, who nevertheless decided to accept this offer. Later, as Louisa was heading home in the carriage, she thought that it was difficult, but at least this issue was settled. And since now the prophecy will not be revealed, she can calmly deal with her divorce. Of course, she would still need to look after the priests regularly, but now she at least knew their weaknesses. Regan wondered how he had learned about the prophecy, but it was a secret from the firm. But the hero wanted to know at least the content, because the girl probably knew him, so she did not want to make it public. Louise appreciated his deductive abilities, but it was a secret. With a savory yawn, she thought that he must also have secrets that he could not tell about. After a short silence, the hero decided that Louise needed a little rest. The girl understood that although he had secrets, they were sailing in the same boat, so it would be polite to keep quiet. As she fell asleep on his shoulders, Regan wondered when he would be able to reveal his secret to her. At the same moment, the heroine unexpectedly found herself in the Wadel estate, in one of the corridors shrouded in the darkness of the night. She was at a complete loss, not understanding when they had arrived. Suddenly, a little girl ran past her, almost knocking Louise off her feet. The heroine immediately called out to the child, but the baby continued to run, as if she did not hear her. After a few posts in confusion, Louise followed her as fast as she could. Stopping at the door, the girl turned around and looked in the direction where the heroine was standing. Then she turned back to the door and Louise realized that she could not see her, and also that she saw herself at a young age. Going inside, little Louise went to the bed, on which someone was lying wrapped in a blanket. She lit a candle on the pedestal and sat down next to the sleeping boy, notifying him of her arrival. The hero, with blonde hair and purple eyes, was surprised to see the baby here. She wanted to know if he was feeling well, and the girl put her hand on his forehead. As it turned out, he felt good the moment she came, and little Louise decided to come to him every day. The boy thought that then the Duke would scold her, but the baby was calm because Daddy is never angry with her. Looking at her carefully, the boy wondered why she always came to him. The reason turned out to be very simple, and the thing was that he was bored here alone. As she approached him, she thought that his blonde hair shone like the sun. But, as it turned out, the boy did not like the sun at all, which greatly puzzled the baby. The reason was that the sun was too high, and he didn't want everyone to look only at him. Then little Louise offered him to become the moon and decided that she was the only one to look at him. Smiling sheepishly, the boy decided that from now on, he would also only look at her. And now she will always look together, only at each other. Waking up from sleep, the heroine again saw the same blonde hair in front of her. Carrying her in his arms, Reagan wondered if she slept well. The heroine stared at him fascinated, slowly digesting the dream she had seen. Puzzled by her gaze, the hero decided to find out what had happened all of a sudden. Grabbing him by the collar, Louisa decided to ask him bluntly if they had seen each other before. The hero fell into a stupor, not understanding why she was asking him about it so suddenly. Louise pretended, "I thought she had called him something strange before." She didn't know if it was just a dream or a real girl's memory. Anyway, it was very strange, because it was never mentioned in the book. Reagan wanted to say something, but suddenly the tip of the blade of the sword rested right on his neck. Putting his sword to his neck, the fox wanted to know what these two were doing here. The heroine immediately screamed in fright, begging her brother to calm down and immediately lower his sword. But Reagan pretended that they were doing what the Lord thought they were doing here, and was he going to burn his hair now? Enraged, Louis was ready to burn not only his hair, which frightened the girl even more. The Lord didn't understand how he could remain calm when some freak was flirting with his sister. Louise understood his feelings, but he believed that it was extremely abnormal to solve all the problems by burning his hair. In addition, Rian just brought her, as she was very exhausted and fell asleep. But my brother still didn't understand why they were standing so close to each other now. Hearing that the hero annoyed her very much and she grabbed him by the collar, he immediately looked at his sister with admiration. Besides, he was happy to hear that Louisa had shown those saints their place. Louis was a little sorry that he was not there, because the very sight of him makes the priest's legs shake. Smiling at him, the heroine realized that her brother had cut them off in the middle of a very important conversation. Suddenly, Louis thought that tomorrow they could go to the Philiadeth mine, where his sister could possess the elemental. Remembering that she could master magic, the girl's eyes immediately sparkled. The Lord hoped that she would also have fire, because then he would be able to give her advice. The heroine was so exhausted with this prophecy that she completely forgot about the elementals. Later, as she sat in her room, she realized that she had forgotten to talk to the moon again. The maids who were next to her, hearing about the moon, thought that she wanted to make a wish. Meanwhile, Louise did not understand how a person who came from another world could remember something that was not in the book. Could it be that she would disappear altogether, and her soul would be swallowed up by Louise Waddell's body? Or maybe her soul gradually merges with Louise, and that's why she remembers all these memories. The maids thought that their mistress must have suffered from the priests in the temple and was very tired. As she served her a cup of tea, Ameline thought that Lady Louise might need to go to bed early tonight. The heroine decided that if they went to the mine tomorrow, they would have to try to talk to the moon on the way. That night, Lyra went to the Emperor's study, wanting to visit him. However, the guards immediately blocked her way because His Highness was very busy right now. Lyra hadn't seen him in a week and wanted to run in just a minute, but the guards refused to let her in. Turning around, she walked away, all in tears and accompanied by her maids. The girls tried to calm her down, believing that when the Emperor was done with all his affairs, he would definitely visit her mistress. They began to remember that a few days ago, the Chancellor resigned from the Imperial Palace. One of the maids heard in passing that immediately afterward Raoul went to the Waddell house. From this, the maids concluded that the Empress had summoned him to her on purpose. Lyra was furious at Louise, not understanding how she could do such a thing. It was terrible that the one who should take care of the empire was leading to its destruction. In addition, she also tarnished the dignity of the imperial family by filing for divorce. The maids were sure that the Empress was simply jealous of His Majesty for Lyra. The girl herself understood that all the problems boiled down to the fact that her position was not strengthened. People whispered that Yuri's favor to his mistress was weakening, and apparently she was not going to become his wife. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a man who was glad of this unexpected meeting. They hadn't seen each other for a very long time, and the man wanted to ask Lyra how Her Highness was doing. Trembling all over, the girl felt an icy cold on her back and looked at her father in horror. The man waited for a long time near the entrance, after which, nevertheless, he decided to enter to see his daughter. He hoped that she was doing well, and Lyra tried to mumble that she was fine. However, the man was not sure about this, because he had already heard that the Empress had filed for divorce and returned to the Vidal house. Shaking with fear, the girl promised to take care of everything that happens in the palace. But the father did not understand how he could not worry, because this issue concerned their family. Grabbing her chin, he also didn't understand what she was doing with such a cute face. It was dangerous to remain a mistress at such a time, and if she lost the favor of the emperor, then their family would come to an end. Throwing her aside, he expected to receive good news from Her Majesty soon. After that, the man left, and as soon as he disappeared from sight, Lyra immediately collapsed to the floor, exhausted. In a state of despair and terror, she did not understand what to do now. Suddenly, one of the maids thought that the mistress now had only one way out, but she needed to strictly follow what she was about to hear in order to win back the emperor's heart and gain his mother's support. Upon hearing that she would become the most important woman in the empire, Lyra immediately perked up her ears. The next day, as Louise walked along the fossilized rocks, she wondered how long they had to go. Of course, she assumed that the path would not be easy, but the raging magma and stones around created an atmosphere of hell. Laughing lightheartedly, Louis was so mesmerizing that it puzzled the heroine. The Lord was sure that his sister already knew about their family's pact with the first elemental. The girl had read not long ago that the Vidals had received the title of elemental kings. Therefore, the fire of the Vidals was so powerful that it was able to consume any other flame. Regan remembered that at the dawn of time, there were two elementals, fire and ice, which were the first to appear among humans. Louis flew into a rage, as he wanted to tell everything himself, and Louise wondered, isn't it the element of ice? As it turned out, he had disappeared, so only the Vidal fire element was now known as the first. But the heroine did not understand at all how he could just disappear. According to legend, both elementals lived in peace, and each ruled his part. But soon, a conflict broke out between the elementals, the cause of which was humans. The fire elemental was kind to humans and wanted to help them, while the ice elemental hated humans and wanted to exterminate them. However, Vidal chose the side of the humans, and disappointed by this, the ice elemental hid itself. The heroine realized that the person with whom Vidal made a deal was their ancestor. That is why they took the name of the fire elemental, Vadal, as their family name. Then Louisa wondered what the name of the ice elemental was, and as it turned out, her name was Eldia. However, over time, people called it by a more appropriate name, Calamity. Everyone was afraid that one day she would return and destroy all of humanity. Despite the fact that the icy element seemed evil, the heroine felt inexplicable pity for it. Still, it must be excruciatingly painful to be abandoned by your only friend. The girl thought that if Vidal could burn everything and Eldia could freeze, then which of them would win? Louis thought it was a very good question, but he couldn't answer it himself. In any case, these were just legends. Eldia was far away, and the Lord just wanted to show how benevolent Vidal was. Therefore, the brother wanted his sister to be like a fire elemental, to behave proudly and confidently. According to him, she realized that she needed to do all sorts of wild things and turn everything upside down. In the meantime, they had finally reached the goal of their journey, approaching a large shaft leading deep into the rock. Upon entering inside, the hero's eyes were immediately struck by a dazzling light emanating from the large crystals on the sides. Louise looked around, fascinated, admiring the beauty of this place. Everything around the heroes was elemental crystals. They could not be touched thoughtlessly, since each crystal had certain properties. Taking a small red stone, Louis placed it in his sister's hands, closing her fingers. As it turned out, the crystals chose their own owner, and if he understands that the person is suitable for him, he will make himself felt. The girl did not understand how this would happen. Could it be that it would just suddenly catch fire? But everything was simpler, and the stone had to merge with the body of the heroine, so it was impossible to touch everything. And since Louise was the heiress of the Vidal blood, her bond with the crystals is twice as strong as that of the others. However, no matter how long she continued to hold the stone in her hands, nothing happened. Looking at her in bewilderment, the Lord was shocked and believed that this simply could not be. Quite a lot of time has passed, but there was absolutely no reaction that the heroine would not touch. As Reagan handed her another crystal, he wondered if fire was simply incompatible with her. Snatching the stone from his hands, Lewis considered it impossible because she was Videl. However, according to the hero, she was also the first girl in their family, which means there could be exceptions. Falling to the floor in despair, Lewis bitterly said goodbye to his dream of burning mountains and fields with Louise. Thanking God that she did not receive the power of fire, the heroine immediately hurried to calm her brother. Cheering up, the Lord decided that it was hard to guess the first time, because for some it takes months or a lifetime. As for Lewis himself, though, he contacted the first elemental he came across as soon as he entered the mine. In desperation, he began to wail again, believing that the fire elementals had gone completely mad if they did not recognize Videl. Looking outside, Reagan decided that it was time to wrap it up since the sun had almost set. The Lord decided to stay to get the crystals, and the two of them went to the carriage. Thinking that her brother had decided to spend time with her instead of working, Louise decided that he clearly did not know how to prioritize. At the time, Reagan admitted that he too would have put it first. At this moment, the girl remembered that there was one more unresolved question for them. Her brother, who was always watching her, was not here, and when they returned home, there would hardly be a chance to talk alone. Reagan wondered what unresolved issue they were talking about. At the same time, he abruptly approached Louise, causing the heroine to be confused. Seeing that her hand was dirty, he began to gently wipe it with a napkin. Greatly embarrassed, the girl decided to clarify whether he was really the same moon. Grinning, the hero was surprised that he received a nickname so unexpectedly. The heroine was sure that he would like her, because he loved the moon more than the sun. Thoughtfully averting her eyes, she pretended to be mistaken in her judgments. However, she turned out to be right, and Reagan really loved the moon very much. Then Louise realized that it was indeed a memory from her life and not just a dream. She admitted that she didn't have many memories from her childhood, but as soon as she returned home, she immediately began to remember something. Looking at her carefully, the hero decided to clarify what exactly she could remember. Thinking about it, Louise remembered the sick child lying on the bed in the dark room and herself running around him. Now she had no doubt that the child was Rian. Kissing her hand, the hero hoped that she also remembered her promise to look only at him. Again greatly embarrassed, Louisa thought that he was now proposing to her. At the same moment, the carriage shook violently, and Reagan immediately took it in his arms. Coming to his senses and going outside, the hero demanded to explain what was going on here at all. As it turned out, the problem was in a man who sprawled right on the sidewalk. Looking at him intently, the heroine recognized him to her horror as Ruel. The hero, who was very thin and exhausted, was delighted to finally see Her Majesty. The surrounding servants hardly recognized the frail poor fellow as the former chancellor of the empire. Suddenly, Ruel's gaze fell on Reagan, who was standing behind the empress. Recognizing the missing prince, he pointed his finger at him in horror, not believing his own eyes. At the same moment, a small spark flashed in the air and Ruel immediately lost consciousness, and Reagan managed to catch him. The hero decided that the chancellor was now just exhausted from work and needed to rest, so he decided to escort him to the trunk. That night, Ruel abruptly opened his eyes and found himself lying on a large bed. Seeing that he finally came to his senses, the heroine was completely delighted. The hero was glad to hear the voice of the empress, who left him in a bureaucratic hell. He found out that he was now in the Videl Manor, and at that moment he remembered how he lost consciousness. Louise didn't understand what had happened to him because he didn't look much like a man from the palace now. He remembered how, tired of carrying everything on himself, he decided to resign and leave the palace. Ruel received an invitation from Louis and was already halfway through, but got a little lost. Then Louise suggested that the former chancellor had topographical cretinism. However, the hero understood that while he was dealing with all the affairs in the palace, Her Highness was having a good time here. He was grateful that she had left him there alone, to work until he died. Louise remembered that in the original story, she really died from an incredible amount of work. At that moment, Reagan suddenly walked in, leaving Ruel in a stupor. After freezing for a few seconds, the hero suddenly screamed, thinking that he had seen a ghost. Regan slowly walked into the room, and as he looked at him, Ruel realized to his horror that he had not dreamed. Making a thoughtful look, the prince was surprised that even men consider him handsome. Louise thought that Rian was indeed handsome, but calling him a ghost was too much. Ruel was shocked by Her Highness's words, realizing that she did not know the identity of the hero. Wanting to tell everything, a barely noticeable lightning flashed in the air again, and the former chancellor's mouth slammed shut. Regan pretended that Ruel was speechless from fatigue, which was commonplace. Therefore, the former chancellor may not be able to talk for a while, which is why Louise was stunned. Hearing him ask her to go get the doctor and leave them alone, Ruel broke out in a cold sweat. He tried to stop the girl with gestures, but the prince covered him with his body. As soon as the door closed, he turned to the hero, speechless with fear, wanting to talk to him. Meanwhile, Lyra was rushing around near the emperor's office, not understanding what she was doing. The guards were already annoyed by the fact that she had been tossing from side to side for 3 hours straight. The maid wanted her to be braver because His Majesty would surely understand her. At the same moment, the doors abruptly opened and Yuri came out into the corridor, accompanied by ministers. They persuaded him not to go to the Vadel Manor because it could be dangerous. However, Louise continued not to respond to his letters, and he could no longer endure wanting to speak to her personally. He believed that nothing would work without the Empress, because the Empire and the imperial family were in complete disarray. And if he had known right away that this would happen, he would have paid more attention to the heroine. Suddenly, Lyra appeared in front of him, greatly surprising Yuri with her appearance and wanting to talk to him. He did not understand what she was doing here because Lyra knew that he was busy. If she wanted to say something, she could convey it through the servants, but the girl decided that it was too important. Looking into his eyes with a smile, the girl admitted that they would soon have a child. Gloomy in an instant, the emperor stared at her in shock, realizing what he had heard. Meanwhile, with a snap of his fingers, Regan removed the zipper from Ruel's mouth, restoring his ability to speak. The hero was immediately finally convinced that in front of him was the missing crown prince, Regan Klaus Owen. The prince was glad to see his old friend again, after a long separation. But Ruel did not share this joy, considering the hero an arrogant idiot. Grabbing him by the collar, the former chancellor did not understand how Regan could do this to him. Forever in the past, Ruel had bet his whole life on him, and he suddenly disappeared. Regan understood that the hero might have had an extremely difficult time and sympathized with him. According to Raoul, the prince was in charge of his life because of him, the hero's mind and body were in complete disarray. At that moment, the door behind them swung open and Louise, Louis, and the butler walked in. Holding the prince by the collar, Ruel and Regan looked as if something was going on between them. Those who entered were greatly puzzled, thinking that their joint idyll had been disturbed. Trying to push Ruel away from him, the hero tried to explain that they all thought the wrong thing. But Louise was sure that she understood everything correctly, after which she turned around and began to leave. The butler and Louis hurried after her, and the maids behind them giggled softly. After the door closed, Regan stood for a while as if rooted to the ground. After that, he collapsed on the bed in despair, not understanding what to do with all this now. Ruel was furious that the prince was worried about the lady while he was going mad that his dead friend was alive. The hero did not understand what Regan was doing all this time and how he survived after that accident 10 years ago. First of all, the prince did not consider it an accident because someone deliberately tried to kill him. That day, he received a letter from his father, who wanted to talk to him one last time and immediately went to see him. But on the way, they were attacked and there were too many mercenaries, so over time, the situation began to develop against them. After the crown prince and the knights had exhausted all their strength, the opponents used poison. Ruel wondered if His Highness remembered what kind of poison it was. Regan remembered only that his body was as cold as ice and his tongue was petrified, making it difficult to speak. The body became hard as a stone, and although he and the knights were conscious, no one could move. They were thrown into a wagon to be taken somewhere, but there was an accident and the carriage fell off a cliff. Fortunately, it happened not far from the Vadel estate, and soon the Duke and his retinue found him. The only thing that Ruel didn't understand about this situation was how the prince was able to survive after falling off a cliff. As it turned out, the mercenaries wrapped his body well, because although he was paralyzed, his magic remained with him. It only meant that the assassins were well aware of who the prince was. And also, they knew about his magical ability to control lightning. Lightning itself was a rare ability, and Reagan had just manifested it, so very few people knew about it. And this means that the death of the crown prince was beneficial to someone, directly from the imperial family. Reagan was sure that the mother of the current emperor, Marilyn, was involved in the assassination attempt. After listening to his story, Ruel understood why the hero had not returned to the palace all this time. However, this was not the only reason, because the consequences of the poison were incredibly severe. The poison was so strong that it took a long time before it was possible to neutralize it and restore the prince. Ruel didn't understand why the Videls had helped him when they had to get something out of it too. The Duke planned to use Reagan to abdicate Louise. Shocked by what he heard, he realized that they wanted to make a new emperor out of the prince. The reason was that if the emperor changed, he would be able to get his daughter back. Ruel thought that if he was talking about a prince born to the empress, there should be no problem. The nobles will not object either, especially if they know that the Videls are behind the return of the crown prince. The former chancellor was shocked that the Duke had been planning to succeed the emperor for more than a decade for the sake of his daughter. Such a phenomenon was in the spirit of the Wadels. Besides, everything looked good, despite the fact that this is a betrayal of the current crown. And we are talking about the return of the legitimate prince to his throne, which in the eyes of the public will be fair. However, Ruel wondered why Reagan would go along with the Duke's plans, knowing that he had saved him to use him. As it turned out, he is waiting for Louise's divorce because even after becoming emperor, he will not be able to marry a married woman. Looking at him in amazement, Ruel realized that the hero had been planning this for years. Later, while eating at the table, Louise noticed Ruel's strange appearance and thought that he was hiding something. When she heard that he didn't know anything, she wondered what exactly he didn't know. The hero wondered if the Videls knew that the Mad Prince was hunting for Louise. At this time, Reagan was eating with a straight face, which puzzled Ruel even more. Suddenly, Amelin ran into the dining room carrying another letter from the imperial palace. It said that his mistress had become pregnant by His Majesty, and they invited Louise to Lyra's coronation as a wife. The heroine was shocked by what she heard, realizing that this simply could not be. Meanwhile, the emperor furiously threw open the doors leading to his mother's room. Calmly drinking tea, she did not understand what had brought His Highness here. Yuri wanted her to stop pretending that she didn't know anything, because he was not in the mood right now. Then she wondered how many times she had told the emperor that he should not lose his temper. Yuri was angry at her for sending a letter to Louise without him knowing. She did not see anything unusual in crowning the mother of the heir, and the empress was obliged to be present at this. What upset the emperor, however, was that she had sent the letter on his behalf. At this point, Marilyn seemed to be afraid that Louise would turn her back on him completely. His mother did not understand his excitement because he did not marry a girl out of great love. Looking away, Yuri thought that affection might emerge over time. Laughing at his words, his mother was calm because she had foreseen this and could not miss the opportunity given by Lyra. Horrified and confused by her words, the emperor did not understand what his mother was up to. According to Marilyn, having received such a letter, the empress would relax her vigilance and want to return. Louise will probably think that Yuri decided to give up and agree to a divorce. Confident that the girl would fall for it, the emperor's mother intended to wait simply and patiently. Later, she learned from a personal maid that there were doubts about Lyra's pregnancy. Meanwhile, immediately after reading the letter, the heroine realized that it was sent by Marilyn. It was obvious that she would hardly participate in Lyra's pregnancy. And surely she thought that when she received the letter, the empress would immediately run to demand a divorce. Besides, considering that she had intercepted Louise's letters before, it must have been the work of the emperor's mother. Surprised by what was said, Louis decided that then it would be better to just ignore this letter and not go anywhere. Her brother was horrified, because she knew about the trap in advance, but the girl wanted to solve this issue as soon as possible. She couldn't just sit still for eternity doing nothing. Due to the absence of the empress, chaos will begin in the palace, which will soon affect the lives of the townspeople. And when that happens, they will blame Louise for abandoning the empire and leaving. Initially, it was assumed that Lyra would become pregnant after Louise's coming-of-age ceremony, but it was still 2 months away, and it was very different from the original story. The pregnancy could be real, but if Lyra is lying, then this can interfere with the heroine's plans. The Duke was categorically against it because they were finally together and he was very worried. Moving closer to him and making a pretty face, Louise thought that she was not alone now, and besides, she herself had become different. The father immediately shed tears from the incredible charm of his daughter, covering his face with his hand. Regan was also opposed to sending her there alone and decided that he would go with her. But the Duke, Louis, and Reuel simultaneously opposed his departure. Remembering that he had been there recently, the Lord volunteered to go with her, but the Duke was against it. He reminded his son that Toll had threatened the Emperor during his last trip. Therefore, Louister decided to go himself, but everyone was against it, since his status did not allow him to just go. That was the last option, and the three of them stared at the puzzled Reuel. The hero decided to oppose his trip himself because he had recently resigned and left the palace. Looking at him attentively, Luisha suddenly had a wonderful idea. With a sly smile, she wondered if Reuel would want to get a job at the palace again. A few minutes later, Louis and Regan forced him to sign an application to become the heroine's lover. Watching the process and the hysteria of the hero, the girl thought that life was probably hard for them. Later, escorting her to the carriage, Regan resented her not accepting his application. But if it weren't so important, Louise wouldn't want to make such a scene in front of the Chancellor either. After all, she did not like the way he shouted himself like a genius and constantly grumbled. Suddenly she realized that she was trying to console the hero, and perhaps it was because of that dream. Smiling, Regan wondered if the heroine had to choose between them. Who would she choose? Running her hand through her hair, Louisa thought that Mr. Moon was out of competition. At that moment, the hero looked at her in such a way that steam immediately poured out of the girl. Delighted with her answer, he decided to leave everything as it was, and the heroine thought that it was time for them to hurry. She understood that although it would not be for long, they would be in argument, but far from each other. And even if it was for a short time, she was sad that Rian would not be able to go with her. As they approached the carriage, they heard the cries of Reuel, who believed that it was not too late to change this foolish decision. At the same moment, the heroine remembered how, after waking up the Chancellor, she had caught him with Rayan. The two of them held on to each other, and the hero decided to take responsibility, but Rian considered it a simple misunderstanding. He admitted that there was someone whom he liked for a very long time, although it was not mutual love. Looking at him with a smile, the heroine knew perfectly well what he was talking about. At that moment, having stuffed poor Reuel into the carriage, Amilene began to hurry Louise to leave. The girl hurried to her, but suddenly Regan grabbed her hand and slowly pulled her to him. He really wanted to understand what exactly the heroine knew about what he said. The girl didn't understand. How could she not know this when everything was so obvious? After that dream, she was already sure that the hero had feelings for her, and perhaps Louise also loved him. But unfortunately, she was not Louise, and when the question of life and death is at stake, there is no time left for personal feelings. Pretending to be joking, she sat there as if she had no idea what he had said. However, Regan was completely sure that she really knew everything. Suddenly, the hero laughed, confusing Louise. If he had wanted to give up so easily, he wouldn't have gone that far. For now, he decided to let her go, hoping that the heroine would think about this matter before their next meeting. He didn't want to do anything that might not please the young lady. After that, the hero gently kissed Louise's hands, and the girl tried not to react to this in any way. At the same moment, Ameline screamed again, and the heroine hurried into the carriage. As she sat down, the Duke and Louis also came to see them off. Waving goodbye to them, she promised to return to them soon. Her father and brother hoped that she would be careful not to try to solve all the issues on her own. Reuel sat stone-faced, not understanding all the drama, because they would all meet in the palace soon. Louise stared at him dumbfounded, not understanding what he meant. Since it was an important royal ceremony, the Waydels were also invited to the coronation. Surprised by this and remembering Rian's words, the heroine realized that she had very little time. After a while, the maid prepared Lyra, doing her hair and makeup. At this time, the girl remembered Yuri's drooping face when he found out about her pregnancy. To her regret, he was not surprised at all, but rather alarmed and worried. Meanwhile, the other servants informed Lyra that countless gifts had been brought to her. The girl was very confused when she saw the piles of boxes with congratulatory notes. As it turned out, this was sent to her by the nobles as a congratulation on the coronation. When she learned that they had started sending gifts as soon as His Majesty announced her pregnancy, she was stunned. Suddenly, a maid ran up to her and Lyra thought that the Emperor was looking for her. But when she heard that Marilyn called her to her, the girl was shocked and horrified. Later, looking at Lyra's confused look, the Emperor's mother thought that the tea was not to her taste. She offered her something else, but the girl refused, sitting with a face full of despair. Marilyn remembered that she drank this tea when she was carrying Yuri, because it helped with pregnancy. Lyra was grateful for the care, but the woman did not see anything special in this, because they would soon become a family. After all, she would soon be the Emperor's wife, after which Marilyn covered her mouth with her hand, suppressing a laugh. She understood that she had been too harsh with the girl, and perhaps she was embarrassed. However, now, Marilyn wanted to make things right and become much closer to Lyra. The woman considered the one who carried her grandson very valuable, which made the girl very happy. At that moment, the maid announced that the Imperatrice had finally arrived at the palace. Lyra was taken aback by the surprise, and Marilyn immediately jumped up from her seat. The woman felt that the girl should also go with them to meet Her Highness. Although the Empress was younger than her, she was still the more important member of the family, and Lyra was expected to worship and follow her. Having received her consent, the woman hurried to meet Louise, but suddenly her personal maid appeared in front of her. She decided to warn her mistress that Louise was no longer the young girl they knew. However, Marilyn was completely confident in herself, believing that they had nothing to worry about. Perhaps the Empress had changed in her absence, but now the Emperor's mother had returned to the palace. She remembered how this girl had trembled in front of her for 10 years and thought that everything would be the same now. When Louise finally saw Marilyn, she immediately hurried to meet her, rejoicing at their long-awaited meeting. Looking at the confident girl, the Emperor's mother was completely confused. For a few seconds, an awkward pause hung in the air, which made the heroine feel uncomfortable. Judging by the imminent atmosphere, Louise and Marilyn did not have such a warm relationship as she imagined. Then the girl pretended that she was just a little worried about what she saw the Emperor's mother after so much time. Marilyn was glad to see her back and wanted to apologize for her son, who was bothering Louise in her absence. In response, the girl thought that if the Emperor's mother had been around then, she would definitely have reined him in. And also, Louise was sure that this time Marilyn would certainly be on her side. The woman in response forced a smile on herself, pursing her lips tightly and looking attentively at the heroine. Louise continued to rejoice that the Emperor's mother would definitely help her, and Marilyn did not like that others heard this. She invited the Empress to go into the house and have a private heart-to-heart talk. Having agreed, the heroine realized that his letter was really a bait, and she did not intend to give a divorce. Glancing at Lady Lyra, Louisa was very glad to see them, for they had not seen each other for so long. The heroine did not know whether she should call the girl an empress, and Lyra, meanwhile, was afraid to look up at her. Louise heartily congratulated her on the latest news and believed that it was a great stroke of luck for the Empire. Marilyn was delighted that they got along so well and hoped that in the future it would be so. Looking at her, Louise saw no point in thinking about it because very soon they would become strangers. Having received such an answer, the woman could not hold back her emotions and stared at the heroine in shock. Suddenly, Louisa remembered that she had completely forgotten to introduce someone to them. At that moment, gathering all his will into a fist, Ruel resolutely stepped out of the carriage. The ministers were overjoyed, thinking that the Empress had persuaded him to return and help them. Grinning ironically, the heroine thought that they were dreaming too much. Putting her arm around Ruel, she happily introduced one of her lovers, about whom she had spoken so much. Seeing the confusion in the eyes of the ministers, she decided that perhaps she should tell about how they met. For Marilyn, it turned out to be a blow from the back, and she froze in place like a statue. Louise was glad she had chosen Ruel, because if it had been someone else, a woman or someone else could have intervened. But they could not just kill such an important person for the Empire as Ruel, although the heroine was a little doubtful about this. After a while, sitting in Louise's room, the hero believed that he had never faced such humiliation in his life. Judging by his appearance, it seemed to the maids that he was about to die. Deciding to stop the jokes, the girl admitted that in fact it was all a disguise. The maids were very happy to hear this because for a second they thought that the mistress had really gone mad. The hero sat in complete bewilderment and did not understand whether he really needed to be here. However, Louise believed that as her lover, he should have been here, but she had no intention of laying a finger on him. Ruel immediately lost his temper, and the girl thought that she felt a little sorry for him because he had never had anyone, and he was very embarrassed. Besides, there were more important things to think about because in just a week everyone would be coming here, including Mr. Luna. She figured she had plenty of time to think now, but the week was too short. While Ruel was indignant that a week was too long, Louisa decided to ask the maids for the latest news. As it turned out, after the news of Lady Lyra's pregnancy spread, her maids became very arrogant. But the girl considered it good news after all. The emperor must have been overjoyed? However, this was not the case, and moreover, Yuri never visited his wife's palace. The maids did not remember at all whether the emperor had called her anywhere, except for Marilyn, who had met her. Louise was sure that it was a matter of the large amount of work that had fallen on him after her and the Chancellor's departure. At the same moment, another maid burst in, announcing His Majesty's arrival. A few seconds later, the Emperor personally entered her room, greeting Louise tearfully. Realizing that they had not seen each other for a long time, the heroine decided, for the sake of decency, to clarify how he lived. She knew that things weren't all that great and didn't understand what had brought him here. Yuri was at a loss, because he ran here as soon as he learned about her arrival. Deciding to clarify the rumors that she had come with the Chancellor behind Louise's back, he suddenly saw Ruel. From surprise, the Emperor lost his balance and could barely stand on his feet, not understanding what was happening. The heroine in response decided that it is never possible to say what can happen between a man and a woman. They had only recently developed feelings for each other when they met at the Vidal estate. In addition, the girl wanted to sincerely congratulate Yuri on the fact that he will soon become a father. After all, there is nothing better than having a child from a loved one. Ruel wondered why His Highness was so pale, but Louise pretended not to know. He has never visited Lyra's palace even after learning about her pregnancy, and does not get out of his office. Making a pitying look, the heroine wondered if there was something wrong with the Emperor. At the same moment, he abruptly got down on one knee, confusing the girl and the former Chancellor. All he wanted now was for her to listen to him, which puzzled Louise even more. Then the heroine decided to immediately clarify that if it was about divorce, then they had nothing more to talk about. But the matter turned out to be completely different. Yuri gradually began to go crazy from the fact that he could not share it with anyone. Louise was ready to listen to him, but she was embarrassed by the fact that he was on his knees. Deciding to sit down at a table with him, she asked everyone else, including Ruel, to step away for a while. But the hero began to resist, because he was strictly forbidden to leave Louise alone with the Emperor. The heroine immediately assumed that the order was given by her father or brother, but it turned out to be someone, even more insane. However, even so, Louise understood that she should at least listen to Yuri and decided that the hero could at least step aside. In the end, Ruel and the maids stood a few meters away from them, watching the situation closely. Louise thought that the Emperor wanted to talk about becoming a father in the future because it must worry him. However, this was not entirely true, and as far as Yuri knew, something did not add up. Then the heroine decided that he had already regretted his relationship with Lyra, which was disgusting of him. But even here she did not guess, because it was strange that the mistress became pregnant at all. Gathering all his will into a fist, the Emperor admitted that all this time he had been taking special drugs. Thanks to them, His Majesty cannot have children, which is why Louise was stunned. She didn't understand why he was doing this. Was it definitely not out of guilt or respect for her? The reason turned out to be that the Emperor never wanted to have children with Lyra. The girl was very surprised to hear this because she was sure that he was head over heels in love with his mistress. However, Yuri did not want to have children from a concubine, as he knew very well how dreary such a life was. Louise remembered that he himself could not have become emperor until tragedy happened to the first prince. But even now, many nobles still disliked Yuri due to the fact that he was the child of a concubine. Therefore, he took drugs, not wanting to create problems, at least until the ceremony of the heroine's coming of age. Louise was curious to know that he was not as brainless as she had originally imagined. Therefore, in the original, Lyra became pregnant only after the Empress's coming-of-age ceremony. Since they planned to keep the helpless Louise locked up, it didn't matter at all that the child was from a concubine. In this case, how could Lyra's current pregnancy be explained? As an option, she decided to check with Yuri if his mistress could be pregnant from another man. The emperor completely ruled out such a possibility because Lyra never left her palace. But the girl understood that the palace had its own small world, and something could happen without the knowledge of His Highness. Yuri continued to deny this, and then all that remained was that Lyra was simply lying. In addition, she did not know exactly about the drugs, since Yuri never told anyone about them. Also, the emperor's mother, according to the heroine, was also not aware of them. However, when she heard that it was Marilyn who offered her son to take them, the girl was shocked. After talking, she went to her palace, walking along the garden and thinking about what she had heard. Louise was already tired, but now it seemed that the situation had become even more complicated. Everything would have been much easier if Marilyn and Lyra had not pulled off this shenanigans to provoke her. After all, the emperor's mother probably knew that Lyra lied, but kept silent in order to disrupt Louise's divorce. And if Lyra's false pregnancy and her ascension to the status of empress fail, this will be the end of the heroine's beautiful departure. Therefore, Louise was determined to prevent this at all costs. Suddenly, she heard the voice of Lyra to the side, who was greeting the mistress accompanied by her maids. Regretting that she had left the palace today, she greeted him back. Lyra wasn't sure if she should ask, but she wanted to know why the empress had returned to the palace. Because of this, the girl felt confused because the mistress was going to divorce Yuri. The heroine would have done it with great joy, but the emperor would not give her a divorce. Lyra's maids felt that the empress's behavior was too disrespectful to the future empress. Louise's maids wanted to stand up for the mistress, but she suddenly stopped them with a gesture. The heroine did not want to arrange a showdown, as she was very tired and just wanted to return. After that, she proudly turned around and headed towards her palace, and her maids followed her. At some point, Louise turned around and looked at Lyra carefully, realizing that she was just pretending. The heroine knew that soon the girl would become an empress, and then she would address her accordingly. Smiling shyly, Lyra was glad to hear this, and then the heroine decided that she should also stop as soon as possible. Louise's maids were worried that such words might lead to misunderstandings, but in their mistress's opinion, everything was very clear. Lyra pretended not to understand anything, and then Louise decided that since she was pretending to be a know-nothing, there was nothing she could do. Still, the girl needed to remember that if she decided to move on, she might never come back. Lyra continued to pretend that she did not understand anything and assumed that the empress was jealous of her. Louise was very surprised that such a thought could have occurred to her at all. In fact, she was sorry that Lyra was so desperate that she did this, so the heroine gave her some advice. However, since the girl did not want to listen to her, there was no other choice, and Louise warned her. Continuing to walk through the garden, the heroine again heard someone calling her, which was already beginning to irritate. It turned out to be Marilyn's personal servant, who stole the empress's letters on the orders of the mistress. The girl was surprised that a man who should be in prison was calmly walking free. Bowing to her, the maid confessed that she had returned thanks to the mercy of the emperor's mother. Louise was about to leave and would have preferred that this woman should not be seen again. The maid dutifully wanted to take care of it in the future, but now she had come to tell her something important. As it turned out, the emperor's mother was waiting for her and wanted to meet her in that very room tomorrow. After wishing her a good day and hoping to see her tomorrow, the maid safely began to leave. The next day, Marilyn was very worried that the heroine would not come and was very happy to see her. Louise did not understand why she could not come, since she had been called by the emperor's mother herself. Marilyn did not stop calling the girl here, thinking that she had forgotten this place. But Louise pretended that she would probably remember this place to the grave. Delighted by her words, Marilyn ordered the maids to open a secret passage in the wall. It had been a long time since they had been here, and the emperor's mother hoped that the heroine missed this place. They both had many memories related to him, and being impatient, Marilyn ordered the servants to escort Louisa inside. After walking along a stone tunnel, the heroine found herself in a dark room with brick walls, with various instruments of torture. As the maids closed the curtains, Marilyn invited the empress to sit down at a wooden table. At the same moment, the maids grabbed her hands and forcefully sat her on a chair. After that, to the heroine's surprise, several sheets with a pen for writing were placed in front of her. Taking the wooden pointer from the hands of the maid, Marilyn realized that the girl would have to write a lot. She decided to start small and ordered Louise to write 1,000 times about how she would never disobey the emperor's mother again. The heroine was in complete shock and did not have time to understand anything, as Marilyn hit her hands hard with a pointer. The woman was outraged that after all the love she received, the girl became so daring. However, there was nothing to worry about, because the merciful Marilyn wanted to re-educate her very quickly. A few minutes later, Louise's hands were bleeding from the blows received, and the girl herself endured, clenching her teeth. Marilyn didn't understand how she hadn't screamed and begged for mercy yet. Smiling at her, the heroine realized that the emperor's mother enjoyed hearing the screams of torture. It was painful, but the heroine was patient enough. However, something bothered her. She understood that the real Louise was even more hurt, and as if overwork was not enough, she also had to endure it. She was forcibly separated from her family, locked in the palace where her own husband poisoned the girl, and his mother mocked her. If Marilyn continues to hit her, there will be scars, and what will happen if she shows them? Marilyn did not see this as a cause for concern because, as before, a healer was waiting outside. Convinced that Louise had really changed a lot, Marilyn thought it was very strange. The most surprising thing was that the girl behaved as if she was here for the first time. Suddenly, she thought that it was not Louise at all, which caused the heroine to be stunned. But the woman demanded to stop pretending, because if she really were Louise, she would not behave like this. At the same moment, lowering her head, the heroine began to laugh uncontrollably, confusing Marilyn. For the woman, this was another confirmation that she was not the real Louise. At this time, tears flowed from the girl's eyes from laughter, because it was really funny. She wondered if the emperor's mother believed that there was someone else's soul in her body. The woman was furious, believing that the heroine was trying to deceive her. However, Louise pretended not to understand how Marilyn's own words could turn out to be untrue. Putting her hand on her heart, the heroine admitted that she was not actually Louise. She just woke up one day and found herself in this girl's body. She hoped that the emperor's mother would find this story interesting enough. Marilyn stood there, gritting her teeth with anger, and could not say anything in response. Louise knew that it must have been really hard to believe what she was saying. The maids, who were shocked by what was happening, looked at the mistress in bewilderment. This infuriated Marilyn even more, because did everyone really think that she had moved her head? The girls began to calm her down, because it was necessary to complete the education of the Empress for today. According to Marilyn's personal servant, the only one who went mad was the Empress herself. Getting up from her chair laughing, the heroine thought it was true because no one had heard the latest rumors. Louise thought that everyone had long known how the Empress had suddenly gone mad. Marilyn was at a complete loss, looking at her with fear and not understanding anything. Holding the curtains with her hands, Louise decided to clearly demonstrate how crazy she was. Abruptly pulling back the curtains, she let a bright ray of sunlight into the room, blinding everyone present. Shielding her hand from the light, Marilyn was confused and did not understand what the Empress was doing. Smiling goodbye, the heroine opened the window and, to the horror of others, jumped on the windowsill. Louise was sure that everyone would be very surprised to learn how Marilyn had mocked the Empress. Thinking that the girl was going to call for help, the woman only grinned because no one would hear her. Louise herself understood this, and besides, if she was heard, the priest would have time to heal her before the people came. The more she thought about it, the more insignificant her whole plan seemed. Therefore, the girl decided to cheat a little because it was not in vain that she had prepared. If the Empress jumped down now, then Marilyn would surely find herself in a rather difficult situation. At the same second, the heroine pushed off with her legs and flew down, straight into a small pond. Looking outside, Marilyn and the maids saw a small crowd of servants and knights, along with Ruel. The hero immediately rushed to the pond, intending to save Louise and pull her ashore. Marilyn looked at him in fright, not understanding where the Chancellor had come from. Meanwhile, having plunged into the pond, the girl began to rapidly go to the bottom, not understanding why this was happening. Louise had prepared witnesses in advance so that when she fell into the water, they would immediately rush to save her. Then, with tears in her eyes, she would reveal to them all the atrocities of the Emperor's mother. However, she did not think at all that her clothes would be so heavy. Quickly sinking to the bottom, she was shocked that she managed to drown in order not to die at work. Thoughts hovered in his head about failed opportunities, as well as the fact that the girl had never kissed before. Gradually losing consciousness, Louisa thought that she still did not even know what Mr. Luna's real name was. Suddenly, she abruptly came to her senses, sitting on the wooden floor in a bright room. Not understanding what had happened and where she was, the heroine saw a lot of shelves with books around. Clutching her head in horror, she decided that she was dead and was in paradise. However, Louise herself understood that this place could not be paradise, since there was no one here. At this moment, her attention was attracted by a book standing on one of the shelves, from which a strange glow emanated. Just as she was about to take it, she suddenly heard that she shouldn't touch the things on the shelf so carelessly. Seeing a young girl with golden hair sitting on the stairs at the top, the heroine did not understand who she was. Realizing that she saw Louise, the stranger immediately jumped down and happily began to greet her. She began to hug the heroine, who was confused and wondered how the girl knew her. The stranger was disappointed that Louise did not recognize her because they had met not so long ago. At the same moment, the heroine saw a strange resemblance to the statue she had seen in the temple. Coming into a state of shock, she suddenly realized that the goddess Belot was now standing in front of her. Relieved that she finally recognized her, Belot gladly introduced her to her kingdom in which they were. First of all, the goddess decided to invite the heroine to the table and talk over a cup of tea. At the same time, she snapped her fingers and a table with a sideboard appeared in front of them. When they sat down at it, the magic kettle began to pour tea itself. The plates began to fill with sweets. Everything that was happening seemed to the heroine very timely because she just wanted to complain to God. She knew that perhaps her words sounded rude, but Louise was extremely unhappy with the current situation. Ever since she had come to this world, she had been cursing the gods constantly, and now she had a chance to talk to them. The heroine wanted to know what was happening to her, as well as who and why sent her to this world. Taking a sip and looking at her with a smile, Belot didn't know what she was talking about. The heroine admitted that she was actually from another world, but then woke up in this body. And now she has become the main character of the novel, which made the goddess laugh very much. Belot decided to clarify if the girl was really from another world, and this place was just part of the novel. Having received consent, the goddess wondered if Louise was sure of this. Louisa nodded uncertainly, and then Belot wanted to know what the book was called. To her surprise, the girl could not remember this, because she began to read it without looking at the cover. Then the goddess decided to find out what the heroine's name was in her past life. As she began to introduce herself confidently, Louise suddenly stopped and was stunned. Clutching her head, she tried with all her might unsuccessfully to remember her name. To her horror, she realized that she hadn't tried to remember her real name since she got here. Looking at her intently with a smile, the goddess didn't understand if there was some kind of problem. No matter how hard Louise tried, she could not remember her real name. Could it be that her very existence is disappearing and Louise's body wants to take possession of her soul? And if this is the case, will the real one really disappear completely? Unable to hold back any longer, the goddess suddenly laughed, confusing the girl. Louise was outraged because her head was splitting from trying to remember her name, and then Belot was making fun of her. Wouldn't it be better if, as a goddess, Belot helped her return to her world? When she learned that she was not capable of such a thing, the heroine pouted even more because then why ask? The goddess thought that instead she could adapt to live in this world, which suited her very well. Belot thought it was the perfect place for Louise, which puzzled her even more. Then the heroine wondered what would happen to this world if she simply disappeared. In addition, the prophecy will soon have to be fulfilled, although now it will not be made public. But if it disappeared, then in this case a loophole appeared in the prophecy. From all this, Louise concluded that the prophecy was ambiguous, which seemed strange to her. However, as it turned out, the gods specifically gave such prophecies so that they could be understood in different ways. Otherwise, people would try to challenge their predestined fate. Then the heroine wondered, why not just keep the prophecies a secret? But even here, everything turned out to be simple, because in this way, the gods announced their existence to people. Once upon a time, there was a man who dared to resist the will of the gods and came here to change his fate. Hearing this, Louise immediately wanted to know who exactly it was. Suddenly, Bellet jumped up and decided that time was flying too fast. When she learned that it was time for her to go, the heroine was completely confused. At the same time, a large hole formed under her, into which she began to fall. Louise looked at the goddess in shock, who thought that their conversation had gone on too long. Remembering something important, Belot suddenly took the girl's hand, after which she froze in the air. She wanted Louisa to say hello to that child, which made the girl take a back seat at the end. After that, the goddess let go of her hand, and the heroine began to rapidly fall into oblivion. Suddenly, she heard the tearful cries of the maids who begged the empress to wake up. Ruel, who was sitting next to him, was horrified, thinking that she could not leave them like this. Meanwhile, the duke's carriage drove into the capital under the dumbfounded looks of others. Pulling back the curtain, Leicester did not understand why there was such turmoil in the city. The lord was also concerned about what was happening, thinking that it was the coronation ceremony of his wife. Seeing lightning in Regan's hand, Louis wanted the hero to maintain restraint, taking an example from him. But Regan considered his words ironic, because the lord had a bright flame burning in his hand. At that moment, a servant knocked on their window, wanting to give important news. Hearing that Lady Louise was in great trouble in the palace, Regan's face contorted with rage. As it turned out, the heroine quarreled with the Dowager Empress, and then fell from the window, losing consciousness. Fortunately, there was a lake near the yard, thanks to which she remained alive and was still unconscious. At the same moment, a deafening explosion rang out, shattering the carriage and nearby buildings to pieces. Seeing that Regan was rushing towards the palace, Louis immediately grabbed him. He desperately appealed to the hero's prudence, because if the missing prince entered the palace, a real commotion would begin. After a while, Louise finally came to her senses after seeing her maids around. The girls immediately ran to her and, as it turned out, the heroine was in her room. She urgently wanted to know what had happened to Marilyn, how many days she had been unconscious, and what the situation was at the moment. According to the maids, she had been passed out for 2 days and now she was not allowed to make sudden movements. The maids were glad to wake her up, because the doctors gave little chance since Louise's heart almost did not beat. As for Marilyn, at the moment she was locked up in the palace on suspicion of murdering the empress. Upon hearing that Louise had lost consciousness, the emperor flew into a rage. The heroine was surprised, thinking that this idiot could at least pretend that he was on her mother's side. Marilyn assured that she had done nothing to the empress, but no one could confirm or deny her words. At that moment, there were high-ranking aristocrats downstairs who, seeing the wounds on Louise's hands, rebelled. As a result, Marilyn's palace was searched, as a result of which a healer was found who confessed to everything. It was possible to extract from it that the woman had been mocking the empress for 10 years. The maids immediately apologized for not knowing of their mistress's predicament. At that moment, Ruel entered the room, leaning on one of the servants. Louise was shocked by the sight of him, as if it were not her, but he had fallen from a height into a pond. Then the hero wondered who, in the heroine's opinion, jumped into the water to save her. And if only something had gone wrong, or he hadn't had time, she would surely have been drowned. The maids remembered that it was thanks to the chancellor, who put pressure on the aristocrats, that it was possible to quickly resolve the incident. Hearing this, Louisa thanked him from the bottom of her heart for his assistance. Ruel thought it was all right, because Louisa would pay him handsomely for it in the future. In addition, a priest was involved in this incident, which caused a storm of indignation in the temple. The aristocrats decided to postpone Marilyn's execution for a while, believing that it would be fair to hold a trial first. Louise believed that this could not be allowed because there was something more important than holding a trial of this woman. Of course, it was also important to expose Marilyn, but much more important was the unfinished divorce. The emperor's mother was not going anywhere anyway, so the trial could wait. Ruel and the doctors wanted the heroine to remain calm because the entire palace was already in turmoil. It was enough that today, almost half of the capital's Wattle mansion was burned to the ground. Louise then decided to go to the palace, but Ruel thought it was dangerous, and Louis was already on his way to her. Meanwhile, the lord demanded permission from the emperor to see his sister. Covered with sweat from fear, Yuri looked away, deciding that the hero was not allowed to go to the empress yet. Louis then reminded him that he had recently burned down a carriage and several buildings when he found out about what had happened. At the same time, his father, unable to contain his anger, burned down a large part of their capital estate. The emperor listened to all this, sticking his tongue deeper, and could not find what to answer. Suddenly, one of the imperial servants burst in, wanting to report to His Highness about the disaster. As it turned out, the capital's merchants no longer wanted to make deliveries to the imperial palace. Hearing that all trading companies refused to cooperate, the emperor was shocked. It seems that they have planned this in advance, and it will take a long time to correct the current situation. But the main problem was that all deliveries were made and managed by the Waddell family. Losing his fear of rage, the emperor turned to Louis, wanting to know if it was their doing. However, the Waddells never resorted to such methods, because if they did not like something, they took out their anger on things. This confused Yuri even more, who did not understand who could have done this. According to Louis, their butler could well have done this, which most likely happened. The Duke probably foresaw such a confluence of circumstances, but for some reason decided not to interfere and not to prevent it. This can be regarded as the fact that the imperial family managed to turn all the Waddells against them. Hearing that they no longer intended to sit idly by, Yuri again felt the icy chill of death on his back. Suddenly the doors swung open and Louise rushed in, accompanied by the maids. Seeing her brother, as well as feeling the tense atmosphere in the air, the heroine came into a stupor. Louis immediately rushed to hug his sister, glad that she had finally woken up. The girl was sure that if she hadn't woken up, he would definitely have burned down the entire imperial palace. Her brother was very indignant at how much she had lost weight since their last meeting. He didn't understand how the people of the imperial palace could be so negligent towards their empress. However, the heroine really felt quite good, thanks to Ruela for this. Upon hearing about it, Louis thought that the hero must have fallen into the lake first to catch her. At this moment, the girl remembered the rumors that half of the Waddell estate in the capital had been burned down and thought of her brother. But it turned out to be the work of the Duke, who, having learned about what had happened, went off the rails with anger. Now, because of what had happened to the estate, they had to stay until the Queen's coronation, which greatly puzzled the emperor. With his eyes bulging wide, Yuri did not understand how the ducal family could live in the imperial palace. Louis knew that there were many spare rooms in the Rose Palace, and the emperor was indebted to them. Yuri was at a complete loss, realizing that this was impossible, but finding nothing in response. Then the Lord wondered if the imperial family really didn't feel sorry for them at all. The emperor understood that their house had burned down and wanted to offer another palace in return, but not the one where Louise lived. But Louis was determined to live there, and if His Majesty wanted to, they would move into his palace. Realizing that this threatened a grandiose fire, Yuri immediately backed down. The Lord smiled good-naturedly in response, sincerely thanking the emperor for his kindness. In addition, he understood that His Majesty had nothing to worry about, because soon everything would return to normal. After that, citing fatigue, he took his sister by the hand and began to leave the office with her. After a while sitting in a room at the Flower Palace, Louis found a letter with good wishes from their father. After the heroine woke up, she was sent many letters with sympathetic words, even by those with whom she was not acquainted. Now that Marilyn was in a difficult position, everyone believed that Louise would soon take the throne. Suddenly, Louis found another package for his sister, which Rian asked him to give him. The girl was very surprised that Mr. Luna personally sent her a gift. Opening the case, she found a necklace of unprecedented beauty in it. Looking at her carefully, Louis didn't understand why she was calling Rian Mr. Moon. The heroine decided that she did not yet know his name. She could call him whatever she wanted, especially since the moon suited him. Once the hero himself admitted that he liked the moon more than the sun. Hearing this, the Lord realized that, as the moon, Reagan needed the sun to shine, in which he saw Louise. Hugging his sister, the brother decided that even if this psycho wanted to be with her, he would not let it happen. After all, there was nothing that a loving brother could not do for his sister. At that moment, a maid came to them who announced His Majesty's desire to meet Louise. Then the Lord wanted her to tell him to turn around and stomp back. If Yuri dared to take even a step here, Louis was ready to immediately take his sister and take her home. At this time, the cries of the emperor were heard from the corridor, desperately calling for the heroine. Louisa thought that if anyone saw him from the outside, they would think that His Majesty had parted with his beloved. However, the brother did not see a reason to worry, since there was only one day left, and tomorrow everything would be decided. At tomorrow's coronation ceremony, something will happen that will turn everything upside down. Meanwhile, Reagan stood alone in front of the mirror, pondering the events ahead. At the same time, Lyra was in a hurry to the Rose Palace, terrifying her maids. She felt that she should greet the Empress, who had recently woken up. Most of all, her maids were worried about the fact that Louise was guarded by Louis, who was better not to be trifled with. Besides, it was clear to everyone that the Empress had made this fuss in order to attract His Majesty's attention. Lyra's maids believed that Louise was trying to postpone the coronation ceremony in this way. The girl thought that perhaps they were right, but she did not want to think badly of the Empress, who had already suffered. Suddenly, approaching Louise's room, she saw Yuri near the door, who was desperately rushing inside. The Emperor begged the young lord to allow him to see the heroine at least for a while. Seeing this scene, Lyra was stunned, and her vision blurred with shock. The Emperor did not understand what she was doing here, but the girl wanted to ask him the same thing. Calming herself, Lyra assumed that he, like her, was just worried about Her Majesty's well-being. Grabbing her hand, Yuri suddenly became serious, deciding to stop all this. The girl, in tears, tried to understand what was happening to the Emperor lately. Suddenly, she saw clearly in his eyes the feelings he seemed to have for Louise. In response, the Emperor decided to ask if she really didn't want to tell him anything. Lyra, with tears, pretended that there was nothing of the sort, but Yuri continued to insist. Then the girl screamed desperately, deciding that she really had nothing to confess to. And anyway, what was wrong with him? Moreover, she never received an answer. Did the Emperor have feelings for the Empress? After that, Yuri disgustedly threw her hand aside, deciding that he should leave. He had no desire to continue talking to her, and he wanted to be alone for a while. Later, sitting with the maids on a bench, she was sure that the Emperor was suspicious of something. The maids were sure that Lyra was mistaken, because she was extremely cautious and could not arouse suspicion. However, the girl was sure that he knew everything and believed that Yuri was probably disappointed in her. Suddenly, Marilyn's personal maid approached them, greeting Mrs. Lyra. As it turned out, she came on the orders of the Emperor's mother, who wanted to invite Lyra to her place. She decided to give the girl one secret information regarding the upcoming coronation. Lyra did not know what would happen if she refused, so she decided that it would be better to go. The maids were horrified by this decision, immediately began to dissuade the mistress. But Lyra saw no point in refusing, because Marilyn was the mother of the Emperor, and she was obliged to go. The next morning, Louise woke up with the thought that today was finally the day. The weather outside was as if there was someone's funeral today, and she hoped that the divorce would be successful. At that moment, the maids came to her, rejoicing at her awakening and vying with each other to offer different outfits. Louis, who came in after them, knew for sure that of the dresses they provided, only the cream one could be discarded. In addition, it was necessary to choose jewelry made of pearls, not precious stones. The maids were surprised by his knowledge, but the hero was well versed in everything about his sister. He could have done anything himself, but his sister had to outshine everyone with her beauty. After a few minutes, the maids were tirelessly admiring how beautiful Louise was in her dress. They believed that divorce was no less important than coronation, so the heroine should be in full force. Therefore, it was impossible and necessary to choose something for the dress without jewelry at all. But Louisa calmed them down, because she had already chosen a necklace for herself, given by Mr. Luna. The maids were delighted with his beauty, and the heroine, in turn, was grateful to them for their help. It seemed to the headmaid that she had seen such a necklace design several times before, but she couldn't remember. When they had finished their preparations, they hurried to the banquet hall, where guests were already waiting for Louise. As soon as she arrived, everyone around began to praise her dress incessantly. The heroine felt as if she plunged headlong into a pit with snakes. Louis, who arrived at that moment, considered this ceremony rather modest. Seeing him, the guests surrounding the Empress immediately began to disperse in different directions. The hero apologized for having to leave for a while, leaving his sister alone. Louise considered his behavior extremely strange, because Louis constantly looked around and disappeared somewhere. She wanted to get an honest answer from her brother. What exactly was he hiding from her? At this moment, the arrival of the Emperor's mother for the celebration was unexpectedly announced. The woman proudly walked down the stairs, looking as if her execution had already been cancelled. Many people thought that she had no conscience, that she had come here to do something so horrible. The heroine caught her gaze, not understanding what made Marilyn feel so happy. At the same moment, the Emperor and Lyra appeared, after which the solemn ceremony began. Louise was surprised by the upset expression on Yuri's face, because this was the wedding he was waiting for. The guests whispered, believing that His Highness had married under force because Lady Lyra was pregnant. Louise understood that the atmosphere of the ceremony was very different from that described in the novel. She wondered if this was the kind of wedding Lyra had dreamed of. As the eldest member of the imperial family, Marilyn expressed a desire to bless this couple. However, there was something that she wanted to tell everyone. The woman knew that everyone present was aware of the recent event that had taken place between her and the Empress. Many must have thought that she was trying to harm the heroine, but it wasn't like that at all. The guests were outraged by her words, because there were as many as 2 witnesses against Marilyn. The woman admitted that Louise fell out of the window because of her. However, she did not push the girl. As for the wounds on Louise's hands, in Marilyn's opinion, she simply had no other choice. After all, the reason for corporal punishment was that the Empress had done something terrible. Not wanting to endure this, the heroine pretended that she had no idea what it was about. Those present immediately supported her, believing that it was Louise who was the victim in this situation. Then Marilyn decided to reveal the truth about the incident that happened with her own mouth. As everyone knew, not so long ago in the womb of the new Empress, there was the heir of the Emperor. However, a few days earlier, Lyra unexpectedly had a miscarriage. The day before Louise fell into the lake, the girl came to the Emperor's mother and confessed everything. According to her, the Empress was fully involved in the incident. Upon hearing this news, Marilyn immediately called Louise to her and scolded her severely. The woman did not understand how the heroine could call herself a person after this. Shocked by what happened, Marilyn lost her mind and resorted to corporal punishment, but Louise escaped by jumping out of the window. Those present did not believe a single word of the woman, believing that she was saying some kind of absurdity. But Marilyn did not understand, and why even then the Empress returned to the palace. After all, before that, she did not respond to the Emperor's pleas to return, but when she heard about the ceremony, she immediately ran in. However, people still considered this only a guess and speculation, because this was not a reason to blame Louise for the miscarriage. Then the woman called the servant, who, according to her, was a direct witness. Approaching her, the maid timidly admitted that during a recent meeting in the garden, Louise had warned Lyra about something. Remembering the heroine's words that there would be no way back, Marilyn saw them as just a threat. Smiling, Louise thought that perhaps that was why they said to be careful in their words. Looking at her in disgust, the woman pretended that there were rumors that the Empress had mocked Lyra. She didn't understand how cruel it would have been to bring Lyra to the point where she had lost a child. Looking at her in bewilderment, Louise decided to ask if it was really about her. Approaching her, Marilyn took her hands and wanted the heroine to finally calm down. Leaning towards her ear, the woman wondered if the girl really thought that she could defeat her. However, Louise thought so, thanks to the woman's stupid son who told her everything. Hearing that he burst into tears and gave her about the drugs, Marilyn was stunned. Suddenly, the woman wondered what the girl planned to do with this information. After all, even if she publishes this information, does the heroine really believe that His Highness will take her side? Louise decided to clarify if the woman really planned to remain so vile until the very end. Suddenly, Marilyn saw a necklace around the girl's neck, which made her stupefied. At the same moment, she jumped back abruptly and ordered the Empress's immediate arrest and an investigation. Suddenly, the doors of the hall swung open, and the Duke, with the Lord and Regan in a mask, calmly went inside. Louister immediately went to his daughter, surprising the heroine with his sudden appearance. Approaching her, he ran his hand over Louise's cheek, hoping that she was all right. Marilyn was furious, not understanding what kind of irreverence the Duke was showing. However, Louister wanted to ask her the same question, because how did she allow herself to treat his daughter and the Empress like this? Suddenly, he remembered that there would be a divorce soon, and thought that this was the reason. Pretty frightened, Marilyn considered this disobedience to the imperial house. But the Duke thought that there was no need to worry in this regard, because he served the Empire a little differently. At that moment, Regan slowly approached Louise, greeting her happily. The girl was surprised by his appearance here when suddenly the hero offered a finger to his mouth. First of all, he had come here to get her answer to his question. Louise didn't know if this was really the right time to do it. Taking off his mask, he decided that there was no need to worry, since he would now personally protect her. Realizing that the Duke intended to take Louise away, Marilyn was beside herself with anger because it was a violation of etiquette. Walking up to her and looking straight into her eyes, Reagan was glad to finally meet his mother. The woman was taken aback, not understanding how this stranger dared to address her like that. The hero was a little upset that they had already forgotten about him, believing that probably he had grown too much. Suddenly recognizing him as her son Reagan, Marilyn almost fell off her feet from horror and shock. The people around also began to whisper, realizing that the missing heir was standing in front of them. Seeing so many familiar faces around him, Reagan wondered how they were all doing. He wondered what his brother would say about the mess in the palace that had been made during his absence. Yuri looked at him attentively, and with every second his face became paler and paler. As Louise watched in bewilderment, she could hardly believe what she had heard. Reagan found it unfortunate that during his absence, his brother had managed to do so many things. He believed that the crown was heavy on Yuri and wanted him to remove it and vacate the throne. People around began to gradually recover from the shock and joyfully recognize the heir. However, Marilyn began to scream, considering it impossible because he should have died long ago. The woman did not understand at all how he managed to survive at all. At the same moment, lightning flashed next to her, causing Marilyn to immediately fall to the floor. The hero was surprised that his mother was so sure of his death, but he did not understand what were the reasons for such firm confidence. Meanwhile, seeing the lightning, the people finally established themselves in his personality, recognizing the strength of the crown prince. Everyone was surprised that the House of Videl still hid it. Since the Duke was not particularly talkative, Reagan decided to explain everything himself. As everyone had assumed, what had happened to him 10 years ago had been a staged accident. Someone attacked the prince's carriage and then pushed it off a cliff to hide its tracks. Immediately after the incident, the palace passed into the hands of Marilyn and Yuri, so no one could object to them. Fortunately, Duke Videl was near the scene, who found him and protected him all these years. People were very surprised that it turned out that the Duke had planned this from the beginning. Hearing the aristocrats whispering about him, Leicester slowly turned in their direction. Everyone immediately closed their mouths, trying not to meet his eyes and shaking in fear. Helping his mother to get up, Yuri did not understand what his brother had done here. The only thing Reagan was doing now was to regain what was rightfully his. But Yuri believed that Louise had nothing to do with it because she was still his wife. Reagan thought that girls don't like obsessive people and decided to ask the heroine if this was true. At that moment, she thought that whose cow mooed, but the hero was sure that his thoughts were pure. As they spoke, the knights came to Reagan, joyfully greeting the heir. However, although the ministers were glad to see him back, unlike the knights, they believed that everything needed to be discussed. Looking at the chaos that was happening, the heroine understood that this was a really difficult situation. Over the past few weeks, ministers have sensed how incompetent Yuri was in state affairs. At the same time, the Videl family stood behind the heir and what was an undeniable advantage. Yuri decided that this issue was too important to be solved right here and now, after which he ordered everyone to disperse. Reagan chuckled, thinking that since they had waited 10 years, they were willing to wait a few more days. In addition, he understood that his brother needed to collect his thoughts first. It was decided to discuss everything in detail tomorrow, and now the hero began to take Louise away from here. The ministers wondered where the heir plans to stay all this time. Reagan decided to settle directly in the Rose Palace, which shocked Louise. Those present were very surprised that he was going to live with the Empress. By handing the heroine the contract, Reagan reminded her of her promise to love him most of all. The Duke seemed to explode with indignation, and the hero thought that this was fate. Leicester thought they should leave the banquet with Louise first, and then talk to the aristocrats. Realizing that they were clearly in the way, Reagan offered to accompany Louise. Without waiting for consent, he abruptly picked her up in his arms, confusing the girl. After wishing everyone good night, he resolutely went to the exit. Meanwhile, the heroine hoped that he did not think to get out of it, because she still had many questions. The prince agreed to answer, but that's it. But tomorrow, and now he had to go and rest. He was glad that he had fulfilled his promise that Louise would know his real name the next time they met. True, he wanted to call it the first, but these stupid people pronounced it themselves. Turning her to him, he wanted the heroine to pronounce his name herself. But suddenly, Louise decided to continue calling him Rian, as she was very angry with the hero. She could not understand how all this had happened and whether he was really the one. Reagan himself wanted to tell her everything, but only after a good rest. After all, he understood how much the heroine was tormented by his mother's attacks. Starting tomorrow, everything was going to change, and the hero was going to lay this world at Louise's feet. The next day, Louise was shocked to read the news that she was having an affair with the crown prince. Suddenly, the head servant Rhonda ran to her, rejoicing that the mistress had finally woken up. As it turned out, there was a real commotion outside and she urgently needed to get out. Going out into the garden, she saw a crowd of society ladies who joyfully greeted Her Majesty. The heroine was sure that she did not arrange a tea party, but according to the maids, these ladies came in the morning. Louise did not understand why the maids had let them in at all if the lady of the house was asleep. However, hearing the noise, the Duke and Lord Vidal let the ladies in and threatened them not to make any noise. Realizing that the maids had no choice but to obey the Duke, Louise wondered why the ladies had come to see her. As it turned out, they wanted to know how she was feeling, despite the fact that it had come yesterday. The heroine understood that the emperor could change overnight, and these women simply decided to support the new government. Tired of listening to all this nonsense, Louise demanded to get to the point. Why did they come here? Dismayed, the ladies wanted to apologize for having previously shown disrespect to the empress. The heroine was surprised that they deliberately mocked her because she thought that they understood her, what they were doing. The women immediately began to beg her for forgiveness, considering their act unforgivable. While admitting their guilt, they also believed that they did it unintentionally and that this should not have happened. Therefore, they wanted the empress to put in a word for them in front of the crown prince. At this point, the maids informed Louise that Reagan had ordered a list of aristocrats who did not agree with the divorce for him. Then the women began to shout that their husbands were simply forced to agree to the order of the emperor. Louise wanted them to calm down because even if she intervened, what would it change? However, the women were confident that the prince would listen to her, especially considering the necklace she wore during the ceremony. The ladies were sure that it was the crown prince who had given it to the empress. Not understanding what they were talking about, the heroine wanted to clarify what was wrong with this necklace. Hearing that this was a traditional gift from the emperor to his wife, Louise was shocked. It was a kind of symbol that the woman was the wife of the emperor, but the necklace disappeared after the death of Yuri's father. Marilyn tried hard to find it and was very angry that she couldn't get her hands on the necklace. But now, having seen him on Louise, the whole capital believed that for the past 10 years, she had maintained a long-distance relationship with Reagan. The heroine immediately decided to ask Rhonda where this scoundrel was now. As it turned out, he was at a meeting of the nobles where he was completing yesterday's business with the aristocrats. At that moment, Reagan had a bad feeling, and at the same time, he knew that something good was about to happen. Meanwhile, one of the ministers wondered what His Highness had plans for the future of the imperial family. The aristocrats on Reagan's side believed that if he returned to power, the empire would prosper. But Yuri's side was against it, because it is impossible to change the emperor in one day, and even without reason. However, the heirs people believed that it was Louise and Ruel who had taken care of the empire for the past 10 years, and not the emperor at all. But the emperor's ministers did not understand how a person without such experience could rule the country. The duke, who entered at this moment, thought that the emperor, who was only doing all but having fun, was an even worse option. Seeing Lewister, accompanied by Louis and Ruel, Yuri's side immediately calmed down. Deciding to get straight to the point, Reagan admitted that he did not like bloodshed and preferred to avoid conflict. Seeing how frightened they were, he decided to clarify that he only wanted to return what belonged to him. If Yuri retreated in an amicable way, the prince was ready to guarantee his life, Marilyn and Lyra's life. After all, even if he fought back, Reagan could get rid of him at any time. But if Yuri really wanted to fight him for the title, then the hero will have no choice but to draw his sword. Grinning, Reagan wasn't sure if his brother would be able to hold out against him for even a few seconds. However, the Duke and Louis were against His Highness soiling his hands, believing that the muzzle was their part. Reagan thought that Yuri himself could assess which choice would be most profitable for him. White as chalk, the Emperor wanted to clarify whether his brother really guaranteed the life and status of his mother and wife. It was, besides, Marilyn and Lyra lied in a terrible way, and it will not be difficult for the heroes to condemn them. After a short silence, Yuri also decided to find out what his brother would say about Louise. After all, she was still his wife, and why did Reagan let her through? Gathering a lightning bolt in his hand, the hero decided that his brother did not really want to live. The ministers tried to calm him down in horror because it was just a question. Suddenly, Reagan removed the lightning bolt and ordered silence to be created as it came. At that moment, the doors of the hall opened and a servant entered and announced the arrival of the Empress. Waving goodbye to everyone, Reagan hurried to her, pretending that he had urgent business. Louis was a little worried about this, believing that the hero should be torn away from his sister, but the Duke was calm. Gathering the fire in his hand, Louister did not care that he was the Emperor and the Duke did not want to leave him alone. Meanwhile, Reagan welcomed Louise, genuinely glad to see her. The girl believed that she had not formally come to him, but to express everything. But without letting her finish, the hero immediately took Louise in a tender embrace. She did not understand what he was doing, because many servants were looking at them now. To begin with, Reagan decided to take her to his favorite place in this palace. He remembered how as a child he spent time here with his family, and when he looked at the pond, he remembered that there were golden carps. Turning to the heroine and seeing her serious look, Reagan fully admitted his guilt, and he decided to apologize to her for not telling her who he really was. Exhaling for a long time, the girl wondered if her father and brother knew about everything from the beginning. When she received an affirmative answer, she was furious, because how could she be kept in the dark? However, as it turned out, they simply did not want to involve the heroine in a coup d'etat. But Louise could not calm down, tears flowed like a stream, and the hero pressed her to him. She understood that the real Louise did not even suspect such an ending, and died, feeling lonely. Reagan was genuinely sorry, but they really didn't want to involve her in this. The girl couldn't hear it anymore, because she knew for sure that she would gladly get into this business. But the hero did not consider it something that she would cope with alone, because Marilyn would never let her go. It was for this reason that the crazy family decided to overthrow the Emperor for her. The hero intended to finally rid her of Yuri, which greatly lifted Louise's spirits. A little later, while drinking tea, she wondered if he had heard the latest news in the capital. As it turned out, Reagan was aware of everything, because the news spread very quickly. The girl was a little sad that after the divorce, she would go to Waddell and he would stay here. Smiling mysteriously and closing his eyes, Reagan decided that as for this, they would look later. The heroine looked at him in bewilderment, not understanding what he meant. Suddenly, Reagan decided to find out when Louise would stop pretending, which puzzled her even more. At that moment, Roel suddenly came with the aristocrats, carrying a document of abdication signed by the Emperor. The ministers immediately began to congratulate the hero on his return to his rightful place. Deciding not to delay the abdication and coronation ceremony, Reagan decided to arrange it tomorrow. Moreover, all the preparations for the coronation ceremony of the Empress were still in place. However, the only problem was that Reuel would have to spend a sleepless night, for which Reagan apologized. Suddenly, taking Louise by the hand, the hero decided that he could not wait any longer. The next day, as planned, the coronation ceremony took place. Standing in the hall with guests, the heroine clearly felt the effect of déjà vu. Most recently, the coronation ceremony of the Empress was held, and now there was the coronation ceremony of the Emperor. Approaching Louise, the former Emperor Yuri hoped that she would not refuse to talk to him in private. However, the girl did not understand. Did they have anything to talk about? But the hero wanted to know if, reproaching him for his ties with Lyra, Louise was really in a relationship with Reagan for a long time? In response, the heroine thought that over the past 10 years, she had not left the castle and could not even send a letter. In addition, she did nothing but do Yuri's work, and now he accuses her of having an affair with her brother, whom she did not see in person. Approaching them, Marilyn ordered her son to immediately stop interrogating the Empress. The woman began to apologize for the behavior of her son, who was simply upset about the situation. Smiling nervously, she pretended to understand how hard it had been for the girl all this time. Admitting that she was wrong, she was ready to do anything, if only the heroine would give them another chance. However, even if she kneeled before her, Louise had no intention of changing her decision to divorce. Marilyn wanted to object, but His Highness's arrival was announced. The doors swung wide open and Reagan began to enter the hall, walking with a proud gait. Sitting on the throne and looking around, he was grateful to everyone present for their coming. He was also happy to take on the imperial powers, which Yuri safely resigned. Everyone began to congratulate the new emperor, and Marilyn shook with anger. First of all, Reagan issued a decree that his brother would return to the position of second prince. Hearing about this, many of the guests were impressed by the magnanimity of the sovereign. In addition, his mother also reverted to her status, retaining the privileges of a member of the imperial family. However, the investigation into the alleged murder of Louise continued, which greatly frightened Marilyn. But the people supported this decision, considering it very fair. Listening to his speech, Louise was sure that since the emperor had changed, she would finally be able to leave the post of empress. At that moment, Reagan just remembered her and decided to move on to the most important thing. The heroine is determined to hear about the divorce and get the opportunity to return to a free life. Smiling, the new emperor decided that the empress remained in her place. Louise, along with her father and brother, were taken aback by such an unexpected turn. After a while, Ruel's right hand hurried to His Highness on a very important matter. For a long time, without getting an assistant, he intended to leave his position. Entering the emperor's office, he saw the Duke and Lord Vidal pointing their swords at Reagan. Throwing the documents on the floor, he didn't understand why they had pointed their sword at the emperor. The Duke decided that the hero should leave because he was only expressing the affection of the Vidal family to the emperor. In addition, he wanted the minister to take with him Ruel, who was lying next to him, holding his stomach. As it turned out, the chancellor received a blow to the stomach and he urgently needed to see a doctor for examination. Carrying him on his back, the minister was shocked that he had to leave the emperor alone with them. As soon as the door closed behind them, the hero immediately began to call for the guards because His Majesty was in danger. Ruel immediately covered his mouth with his hand, for if the minister wanted to live, he had to pretend that he had not seen anything. The chancellor believed that they, ordinary people, should not get into quarrels of such people so as not to get under the hot hand. And in any case, as long as there was no noise from the explosion, there was no need to worry about the emperor. First of all, now it was necessary to hurry to the Rose Palace and notify the Empress about everything. Appearing abruptly in front of them, Louise did not understand why she had to go to her. Holding a knight's sword in her hand, the heroine wanted to know if the emperor had been to him. When she opened the door, she was surprised to see her father and brother, as well as Reagan lying on the floor. Glancing coldly at what was happening, she wanted to be left alone with the emperor. Left alone with him, she wanted to know what Reagan was thinking. After all, as far as her divorce was concerned, everything did not go as he had promised. However, the hero himself did not think so, because as he promised, the girl was freed from Yuri. But in the end, she never became free, much to Reagan's surprise. As it turned out, the hero did not need the power of the Empress at all. Taking her hands, Reagan decided to find out for sure what she needed in this case. The hero did not understand. Was he really so unpleasant to Louise, and she did not have any feelings for him? Later, lying on the bed in her room, the heroine thought she was crazy. She did not understand what it was and what should she do with it now. Reagan considered himself different from Yuri and wanted to fulfill all the wishes of the Empress. Deciding to finally open his feelings, he confessed that all these years he sincerely loved Louise. However, the heroine understood that this confession was not for her, but for the real Louise. The original Louise went through so many trials and died, and the heroine could not continue to take away what belonged to her. For example, the father, who loved his daughter very much and such a caring older brother. After becoming Louise, she was able to enjoy a lot of things, and now also her first love. This was wrong not only with Louise, but also with Reagan, because he loved Louise, not her. Meanwhile, the hero decided that he would never do what she did not like. Then Louise asked to let go of her hand, to which she received a resolute refusal. She was surprised because the hero contradicted his words, but Reagan knew that she did not feel bad from his touch. The hero was sure that, in fact, she felt the same for him as he felt for her. He became emperor only for the sake of the heroine, and without her, the throne made absolutely no sense. Therefore, if the girl had even a drop of feelings for him, he begged Louise to let him love her. And now, lying in her bed, the heroine did not understand why she could not answer him then. But if you think about it, staying unmarried was much more dangerous. After all, if someone buys priests and they let it slip, it will be safer to be under the wing of Reagan. After all, he was a man who became emperor not to own her, but for her sake. The heroine was annoyed by the fact that she always came to the conclusion that it was safest to be with him. Suddenly, she found herself in the corridor of the palace, in the middle of a raging fire. Not understanding anything, she saw something terrible upstairs and hurried up the stairs. As she approached Reagan's bloodied body, she was terrified. At the same moment, she woke up and jumped up on the bed, catching her breath. Running abruptly out into the corridor, she left Rhonda completely confused. Without saying a word, the heroine quickly ran towards the emperor's chambers. Running past the servants in her nightgown, she hoped with all her heart that her dream was just a dream. The guard guarding His Highness's chambers was surprised by the Empress's abrupt appearance. The heroine wanted to meet with the emperor right now, and if she was not allowed in, she would be forced to break in. To her surprise, the guard immediately opened the doors, as he had received orders in advance to never block the path of the Empress. Entering his chambers, the girl was surprised to find that the curtains were closed and darkness reigned everywhere. The emperor's bed was made, and Louise was surprised to find him sleeping on the sofa. Sitting down next to him, she leaned against his chest, wanting to hear the sound of her heart beating. When she heard it, she was glad it was okay, and it turned out to be just a bad dream. Convinced that everything was fine, she decided to leave quietly, but suddenly Reagan grabbed her by the arm. Pulling Louise to him, he didn't know if she was really going to leave him so easily. Taken aback by the surprise, the heroine found out that he had not slept since she entered here. Reagan wondered why she was touching his body, but the girl pretended not to understand what she was talking about. Then the hero began to show her the places where she touched, and she screamed in horror that she only touched her breasts. Greatly embarrassed, Louise had to confess that she had had a bad dream and therefore came. Reagan was surprised that, not acknowledging her feelings for him, but only having a terrible dream, she immediately ran in. And since she touched him, the hero expressed a desire to touch the Empress too. Kissing the girl's hands, he also hoped that she would now have such dreams every night that she would run to him every morning. At that moment, after scrolling through the frames from the dream in her head and delving into his words, Louise's eyes clouded with horror, which greatly frightened the hero. Hugging her tightly, Reagan repeated several times that he was alive and everything was fine. Suddenly, someone's voice was heard from behind the door, wanting to enter His Majesty's room, causing the heroine to jump away from him. Getting up, the hero went to the window and pulled back the curtain, letting the sunlight into the room. He believed that dreams were the opposite of reality, which meant that Louise's nightmare was a good sign. However, Reagan was very surprised by the way she ran to him. Not understanding what it was about, Louise suddenly found herself in a nightie, frozen in place with shock.